estamos ya todos y lo único que estamos esperando es poder escuchar a Kaylin. Kaylin, can you try to talk again?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you. So, ahora sí. Para los que con los técnicos ya todos podemos escucharnos. Estamos listos. We are ready.
Genial, muchas gracias, profe. Vamos a esperar que Arnaldo nos dé el OK.
Very good. We're waiting. Kaylin, do you speak Spanish?
No, sorry.
No, that's good. That's fine. I don't speak first language either. So we're just waiting to get the okay from the technicians that we are being recorded because this goes to YouTube. And then they did receive your video, Kaylin, and they will be projecting it if that's what you prefer. Ella prefiere que el video sea mostrado, la doctora Kaylin.
Okay.
All right, ahora ya podemos dar inicio.
Todavía no me confirma Arnaldo.
Muy bien. I'm still waiting for confirmation. So yesterday we were at this time, which is 6 a.m. for me, and it's 11 p.m. for me, but we had somebody from Russia, so we had 5 countries. I think it's fascinating.
Putting all of us together, I mean, it must be very hard work.
It's a little bit time consuming, but it's actually quite fun. And it's a challenge. And then to see everybody and give everybody this opportunity, it's yesterday I was giving an update on the book, and we have finished editing my part, or interacting with everybody, but now it's with the official editor, or the professional editor, and she's a friend of mine, interesting, like all of us, is give it a heart, right? And so she's interacting with me, and then we're going to go back to some of the authors that we have questions about. But we're projecting now more like January to have it finished. Because for Paraguay, they're entering into the end of their school year. For you too, Kaylin, right? The end of your school year in the Southern Hemisphere. And so it's
Estamos en vivo ya, profe.
Okay, muy bien. Thank you.
Podemos empezar.
Okay. I would like to welcome everybody to this book series, Teaching English in Global Contexts. This is a series of chapters. The book is being produced by the National University of Asunción in Paraguay. It has 55 chapters written by 60 authors from 9 different countries. 5 of the countries are represented in today's panel. From the United States, we have Colombia, we have Mexico, and we have Australia. And of course, Paraguay is represented as being the host of this panel. We will start with Kaylin Liu from Australia because it is 11 p.m. there and she wishes to present first. Then we will go to Araceli Salas from Mexico, then Diana Pineda from Colombia, then Lynn Fuller from the United States and Mississippi. I will be, and then we'll have a video presentation from Leslie Barrett, who cannot be here. She's from the U.S. in Indiana. I will finish and I'm from the University of Alabama at Birmingham. So right now, what we would like to have is the video of the pre-recording for Kaylin Liu from Australia. Entonces, si se puede alzar ese video, por favor. And Kaylin, maybe you'd like to start talking just a little bit about this chapter in the background while we're waiting for the video.
Hello everyone, my name is Kaylin Liu and I'm a secondary school teacher teaching English as an additional language in Melbourne, Australia. Today I'm very happy to present the chapter I co-wrote with Dr. Julie Choi for the book Teaching English in Global Contexts, titled Exploring Meaning and Languaging Practices. So in this presentation, I'll talk about why we started to write this book chapter and how this book chapter is going to help language teachers around the world. As you can see, this is where our chapter is situated in the book. So growing up learning English in China, this is how I usually learn English connectives. I would often see a table like this, which has several connectives that share the same meaning. For example, also, besides, in addition, and moreover all mean 另外 in Chinese, and we use them to add an additional point. And our teacher often encourages us to use different connectives to showcase our wide range of vocabulary and to make our writing more interesting. However, when I did try to use these connectives interchangeably, I often hear people say my sentence sounds weird, as you see in this example. A lot of them may say, besides, sounds a bit weird in this sentence, and also may be a better choice. So what is this issue about all these connectives? And one night, Julie and I started to explore the meaning and use of these connectives. You can find the exact process of our exploration in our chapter, but here I just would like to stress that the enlightenment I've got from that dialogic exploration is that these connectives, which I thought had the same meaning, actually mean very differently. So this enlightenment really got me to think about the whole English language education that I had, which too often focus on the forms, the accuracy and the diversity of forms, rather than actually think about meaning. So what does meaning mean? Here, when I talk about meaning, I don't mean the superficial meaning, such as, also and besides, all mean 另外 in Chinese, and they mean to show an additional point. What I'm talking about is a more contextualized, a more nuanced, a deeper meaning, the meaning that we mean in social context by different people, and the multiple layers and nuances of meaning that people can make through languages. Actually trying to help them make and expand their meaning through languages. And that is why Julie and I started to write this book chapter. We would like to advocate for a meaning-based translanguaging approach, which can help teachers develop knowledge in terms of how they can support their learners to mobilize various language resources their learners have to make and expand their meaning. In order to do that, first, it's very important for teachers to understand these two concepts. What is translanguaging and what is translation? Translation, first of all, is not an unfamiliar term for teachers. Translation is something commonly done by a lot of language learners in their language learning processes. However, as teachers, we often have this love and hate attitude towards translation. On one hand, we value learners' first languages, and we would like to help them use their first languages to make meaning in their second language. Yet on the other hand, we worry that, giving too much time for learners to translate and using their first languages would actually eat up the opportunity for learners to actually think and learn in their second language. So how should we think about this dilemma? In this section of the chapter, we argue that this concept called translanguaging can offer us a different perspective to think about this situation. So in this section of the chapter, we discussed what is translanguaging and what is translation, what's the relationship between these two concepts, how they are different and yet closely connected, and how meaning may be lost or captured in the process of translation. And ultimately, as teachers better understand these two concepts, we believe that they're developing the lenses for them to find meaning-making opportunities in many learners' translation or other multilingual practices for their language learning and teaching. And having lenses is the first step, but it's not enough because all teaching and learning does not happen in a vacuum. So for teachers to effectively enact meaning-based translanguaging approaches in their own classrooms, they also need to know well about their own context and the content they're going to teach. So what exactly do teachers need to know? Why? And how can they develop such knowledge? That's why in this section of the chapter, we actually answer these questions and offer ideas and tools for teachers to build knowledge about their learners and their teaching and learning context, as well as the content of teaching. Once the teachers have a good understanding of the context and the content they're working with, then they need concrete strategies and techniques to help their learners make and expand their meaning. That's why in this section of the book chapter called Teaching Suggestions, we offered a few strategies and examples for teachers to use with their learners. For instance, instead of simply asking their learners to translate texts, teachers can encourage the learners to focus on the process of translation, discussing how they translated the text, what tools did they use, how did they use them, and why, to facilitate this negotiation of meaning and expansion of meaning. Also, teachers could engage in collaborative dialogue with their learners to solve linguistic problems. And if you want more information about the collaborative dialogue, you can also find more details in the paper that I wrote with Julie. Overall, in this book chapter, we would like teachers to understand and remember that meaning should be at the center of language teaching. If we only focus on what different languages are present in class, how many languages are occupying how much time, and whether students' product of translation are correct or accurate, we're then losing this sight of meaning, losing this picture of how students are using all their languages and knowledge resources to negotiate, make, and expand their meaning. So to help teachers better experience and think deeper about the concepts and ideas we discussed in this book chapter, in the Discussing, Taking Actions, and Expanding Further section, we offered a series of questions and tasks for teachers to try out by themselves and discuss among themselves. For example, teachers could translate a short news item from English to the language of their own local audience. Then they could compare their translation with others and discuss their choice of language. How did they translate? Why did they use this language, not the other? To facilitate this negotiation and expansion of meaning. Also, teachers could discuss questions such as how they feel about learners using Google Translate to write their assignments in English. Is it always okay? And in which cases might this tool be problematic and why? Also, in this section, we would offer teachers multiple websites and resources for those who want to explore further on the use of meaning-based translanguaging approaches to language learning and teaching. And here are some of the key references if you want to know more about the meaning-based translanguaging approaches we discussed in our book chapter. I hope you enjoy this presentation and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Kaylin. And now we'd like to open it up to questions. ¿Se puede bajar el video, por favor? Thank you. So, do we have any questions for Kaylin? It's now 11:15 at night, so she would like to answer the questions now. Kaylin, when you started your studies, when you came to Australia and started your studies, did you ever think about how you were translanguaging before you began to study this?
Not really, because when I was learning English in China, there's this wave of English language teaching that you should all be using English only. It is a better way because it helps you to think in that language. So that's how I started to think about, I probably didn't learn English well because I was using this grammar-based translation approach.
Mm-hmm.
But coming to Australia and then all of a sudden knowing all these background, agendas about this English only policy, how that is devaluing students their own linguistic resources, really makes me to rethink, having this different perspective in thinking about these are all of the valuable resources that learners bring into the classroom. And as teachers, it's our job to find an opportunity to really use it in a more meaningful way with learners. Because the thing that I found, even in my class, sometimes it's like, yes, we all welcome these different languages. And sorry, is there a question? I saw a hand raised up.
Okay, keep going. I see Valentina has her hand up.
Yeah. So maybe let me just finish on this one. So I see a lot of teachers, they welcome students' language, and then it's a really good thing, people sharing their own languages. But what Julie and I found is that sometimes it becomes also a bit tokenistic in the way that, we're just showing different languages, but we're not actually helping learners to expand their meaning in using these different linguistic resources. And that's also why we started to thinking about writing a chapter to help teachers think, what kind of things they need to understand and then consider if they want to value these languages and then use it more meaningfully in their language classrooms.
Very good. Valentina.
Yes, I just wanted to piggyback on her answer to ask her this question, because what she mentioned is something that many of our teachers sometimes fear, that by using translanguaging practices, they might be jeopardizing maybe the use of the target language or the exposure of students to the target language, or in the case of Guarani, they might be jeopardizing the survival of Guarani or those kinds of things. How do you think teachers can actually, well, of course, they're going to have to read your chapter to be able to do this, but in a nutshell, what do you think is the most important thing for teachers to consider when they want to engage in these types of translanguaging practices so that they can be effective for their learners for their language learning?
So that's a very, very good question. So I think just like what we talked about in the chapter, it's more about understanding how meaning is very important in language learning, and to actually move away from thinking about, there's this language present and the other language present, like the visibility or the audibility of different languages. It's not really about that. It's really about how these different languages or knowledges or resources come together to help learners to express their meaning, solve problems in languages. And do our teachers really understand the meaning of the word meaning? And what does meaning mean? A word, I think can have multiple layers of meaning when they're used in social context. So I think it's more about understanding what meaning means and how people make meaning in their everyday life, in real life, and then help learners to get into that point rather than just thinking about, now there are more languages used here. I hear another language used there. It's not really about that, but about helping learners to make meaning.
Okay, excellent. So, Kaylin, your presentation was delightful. I really liked how on your PowerPoints you used some very creative approaches to convey meaning, sort of translanguaging with pictures. And so beautiful. And that's our contribution for these panels from Australia. And now we're going to go to the next presentation. And I realized, Kaylin, that at one point, the nighttime will really draw you away from us. But at any rate, now we go to Araceli from Mexico.
Okay. Let me just share my presentation, and where is it? Yeah.
Yeah, we can see it. It's fine.
Yes. Okay. So, yeah, I am going to talk about my chapter, but first I want to say thank you for this invitation. Thank you for all the work you have been doing, collecting all these stories. I already want to read the whole book. So, well, I am here in Mexico, and my chapter is about doing research in the ELT undergraduate classroom. It's chapter 53, and career development and enhancement. What is the topic? The topic is research. Why? Because I usually give these subjects in the major where I work, and students fear this. When they get close to this process, to the thesis writing process, as Caitlin was saying, they are afraid. So it's one of those words they don't want to hear along their major, the thesis, writing the thesis. So I am into research, and I wanted to transmit my idea, that I enjoy doing research. Yes. So the introduction, I am not as creative as Caitlin. I'm sorry. So the introduction is, well, in the light of all what has been happening, new scenarios and new challenges have emerged and changed education across the world. So it is necessary to explore all of these situations. The ELT classroom has then become a space for new kinds of interactions, new ways to teach, and new ways to learn. So pre-service teachers probably still have those ideas that we have transmitted them. They need to create their new knowledge. They need to create their own ways to see things. Yes, and by exploring systematically what goes on in the classroom, pre-service teachers can conduct research, and they can be active agents of their development, and they can become successful English teachers in the future. That is what they want to do, and research is going to help, of course. The background is that even when some teachers don't like it, research has become an integral part of the ELT profession, and not because they don't like it. Probably there is too much to do when we are when we are active teachers. We have so many things to do, but anyway, we have to give time, to commit time and effort to do research. Right now, as I was saying, most ELT college programs include research courses. For example, in my university, we have 3 subjects, most at the end, all of them at the end of the major, and we have three courses where they are encouraged to do research and to do their thesis project. According to Durden, research is disciplined inquiry. Yes. And by being disciplined, research can and should be ethical and rigorous. Being disciplined is one of the characteristics that pre-service teachers need to develop. And, I think that we all who do research know that we have to be disciplined. For Creswell, research is a process of steps used to collect and analyze information to increase our understanding of a topic. Research sometimes is seen just as reading about a topic or collecting information. I always say that when we are in the teacher's room, that can be the very, very first step of doing research. When we talk about problems, just think about the kind of talks that we have in the teacher's room. we talk about things, problems, and that is where research can start. Yes, so teachers can open their ears and start listening to everything that happens in the teacher's room. But we have to do it systematically and in a disciplined way. So EL teachers collect information as empirical data based on experience or direct observation. That's why I always tell my students that what we do in our profession is to analyze everything that we see, everything that we hear, everything that we say, and everything that we experience in our teaching practice. Of course, there are challenges, and especially as I was saying, the work, the kind of work we have, and we are always doing things for our classes. We are always preparing. We are always grading papers, and always we are thinking about the next steps in our classrooms. So time, effort, and sometimes, especially novice or pre-service teachers, they mention that they do not do research because they don't know how to start or how to do it. Also, another factor that might affect doing research, or the fact of doing research, is that there are many affective factors involved. As I said before, students feel overwhelmed by the idea of doing research, of writing a complete thesis. They are afraid, they feel anxious, they do not enjoy this process. Mm-hmm. So I came up with this idea of, it was not my idea, it was Creswell thought, and I divided, and I always show them this figure, and I tell them that these are the steps, and I separate them, like, for example, in the chapters, identifying a research problem and all the introduction and establishing objectives, research questions. That is the first chapter. Reviewing the literature is going to be the second chapter of the thesis. Specifying a purpose for the research, of course, is in chapter 1, but we are going to use it for all the creation of instruments and the identification of the methodology to do research, and that is going to be chapter 3. Chapter 4 and 5 is chapter 4 is analyzing and interpreting data. Then chapter 5 is reporting and evaluating research, and I always tell them that they should present their results. That's why they have to defend their projects, because it's part of this cycle. It's not because we want to torture them or because we want to make them feel more anxious. It's because these actions complete the research cycle. Reporting and evaluating research to the community will make them belong to this community, in which is the last stage of the process, the research process. What are some key points for students, for pre-service teachers, and even novice teachers? Choose a research topic that is interesting, that will make researchers keep focused and interest along the process. By carrying out undergraduate research, pre-service teachers will be able to meet the requirements to earn their degree, which is what they want, and become introduced into the ELT research community. They will know what it is about by doing research, by doing their thesis project. And following the basic research stages proposed by Creswell, which we just saw, this figure will help them keep track of the research journey. They will know where they are, and it gives them the direction to go. When carrying out research, pre-service teachers must follow the institution's guidelines and the supervisor's advice. This is something that I always tell them, because each institution has their own guidelines, their own specific requirements, and even supervisors or directors, the way you call them, they have their own standards, and students will feel safer if they follow what their teachers tell them. In each one of those stages, it is important to know how they feel, how they are advancing. So I proposed in the chapter, I proposed going to these questions probably after each one of the stages. How do you feel about doing research at this stage of your study? As I mentioned before, the affective factors are very important, especially for young people, for novice teachers. So we can help them identify the impact that doing research may have on their growth as professional English teachers. And if they have these insights about doing research and carrying it out, they will improve their performance as English teachers. Yes, in the chapter, I also provide some resources like from some universities and for academic writing. There is this Mexican channel for novice researchers, and of course, which they always find it difficult to apply when time comes. Yes, these are some of my references, the references I use for this presentation. Thank you very much, and I hope you can read this chapter and the whole book, of course. Thank you very much.
Araceli, thank you so much for this enlightening presentation. Having read and edited your chapter, I know that it has many, many good ideas to offer other English language educators and also our pre-service and in-service teachers. We actually, because your presentation went over a bit, we do have room for one question. And so are there any questions for Araceli? Okay, I have a question. When you yourself were a pre-service teacher, did anyone encourage you to do research on your way to becoming an English teacher?
No. I started doing research. In fact, I started doing research when I was doing my master's. Mm-hmm. And this is something that I think I should have started before, because now looking back, I think I missed many opportunities. Yes, many opportunities to do research in those times. But no, I started doing research in the master's. But it has been something that I have enjoyed a lot. Mm-hmm. And that's what I want to do in my courses, to transmit this, how can I say, this joy to do research, because it's a joy for me. Yes, wow. And that's...
Okay, that's wonderful, because this way, all the pre-service teachers that go through your institution receive the joy of researching from you, and you're guiding them to do that. We'd now like to move from Mexico to Colombia and have Diana Pineda and her presentation. Diana?
Thank you, Susan, and good morning, everyone. It's very nice for me to be here with you today, sharing this work, the work that we have been doing along the year. So my topic is on promoting collaborative professionalism among pre-service teachers. And this is somehow connected to what Araceli has just presented, because when teachers are engaged in doing research, one of the ways to do that is to do it with peers. And this is more or less what collaborative professionalism is about. So let's move to the next slide. Okay, so the book chapter is 54, and it's also in the section of career development and enhancement, and the topic is collaborative professionalism. So for years, okay, my name is Diana Pineda, and I am from Universidad de Antioquia in Medellin, Colombia, in South America. I have more than 20 years of experience teaching English, and through those years of experience, I have had the opportunity to work with teachers, like mentoring them at the end of their bachelor's degree in teaching foreign languages, when I coordinated a program, and also in my own experience, like working with other teachers to share activities and materials and ideas, and when there is something that is not working in my classroom. So through all those years, what I have wondered all the time, what makes effective teaching work? And what I have realized through all these years of experience is that becoming part of a professional community is fundamental for that teacher learning and for growing as professionals and as teachers. And one way to do that is participating in communities of practice. Wenger defines that a community of practice is just sharing and engaging in collaborative dialogue with people with whom we have something in common. And it's through doing this collaboration systematically, engaging into the learning of our students, that we can move towards collaborative professionalism. So how can we collaborate with others? Since we are, for example, in the bachelor's degree, we can start participating in research projects, whether because we are invited or just because we are curious about a topic in the field of teaching foreign languages. So we invite other people to work with us and start reading and reflecting together on what is going on, what the literature reports. Another way to collaborate is to be mentored, but also to mentor someone else when we have more experience. And this is important because we need to move and step outside of isolation. Teaching, Harris, for example, says that teaching is a profession where we can be very isolated, because once we close the door of our classrooms, we are by ourselves with our students. So that's why it is important to go beyond the classroom, go beyond our own practices, and start sharing with other people and working together, especially to impact our students' learning. So in the book chapter, what I mainly did is I developed some theoretical concepts, and I connected them. And these are some concepts that have helped me to understand what is going on with a research project that I'm working right now with teachers, English teachers. So in the book chapter, I mainly present the concepts of professional capital, teacher learning, and collaborative professionalism, because through all this experience that I have gained working with teachers, these concepts have helped me to understand what goes on when teachers collaborate and work together for the benefit of their students' learning. So Harris and Fullan define professional capital as this human, decisional, and social capital. Human capital is related to this development of knowledge and skills that we have to acquire as teachers, to teach our classes, to have control of our classes, to help students to communicate in English, and also to know how to teach English. Those are some skills and knowledge that we develop as teachers. And that is also connected to this, what Constance Smith and Lytle define as knowledge for practice, which is knowledge that teachers receive from theorists and from the university, basically when we study our bachelors. And then we have decisional capital, which is related to all those decisions that we have to make in the classroom in the moment that we are teaching. And that is connected to what Constance Smith and Lytle defined in teacher learning as knowledge in practice, because it's knowledge that not only is not that only that knowledge that comes from the books and the theory, but that knowledge that we develop when we are teaching and we know what works better for our students. So that is also knowledge, and that is knowledge that helps us to make decisions. That's why those two concepts in professional capital and teacher learning are connected. And then the social capital is related to those networks that we establish to work with other teachers for the benefit of our students, and that is connected to knowledge of practice, because in that part we start to connect theory and practice, like what we read from theories, but also what we do in our classrooms, and that can be done through research, for example, but also, for example, through planning our lessons together with a colleague, or having a colleague observing our classes and doing peer coaching, for example, and then receiving feedback or giving feedback. And through doing that, when we engage in that social capital, doing this networking and also reflecting on what happens in our classroom and theorizing on that, that is what leads us to work or to do collaborative professionalism. So those are the concepts that I mainly explain and develop in the book chapter, but that have been the result of analyzing and understanding what goes on with teachers' practices in the classroom. So what are the applications of these theoretical concepts? These can be done, or this collaborative professionalism can be done, for example, when student teachers start to engage in research, see it best to investigate or to start reading and reflecting on a topic of their interest. When they engage in communities of practice, even when they are students, they can start to work together to reflect on any topic of their interest, to share what happens in their classes, even as learners. That can be a way to engage in communities of practice. So then when teachers graduate from their bachelor's, they can and they should start participating in these professional learning communities, for example, in study groups, to understand what is going on in our classrooms when we have difficulties, or also when we're doing something very good and we want to share that with other people. And also when we do peer coaching for observing ourselves and giving feedback, and planning together a lesson, and then observing and analyzing how that lesson worked. So those are some ways in which these three concepts of professional capital, teacher learning, and collaborative professionalism can be put into practice. So some key concepts to remember that you will see in the book chapter are the concepts of professional capital, the teacher learning, which was a framework that Constance Smith and Lytle developed in the 1990s, but that are still very relevant. And then this concept of collaborative professionalism that Harris and O'Connor published in their book in 2018, and that can be very helpful because it helps us to systematize what we do in our classrooms and go beyond for the benefit of students' learning. And all this is basically about learning communities. So the main recommendation is to engage ourselves since very early stages in our career development in learning communities. So some questions that I propose in the book chapter for student teachers to start reflecting on are like, are teaching and isolation related? How can we deal with them? And what I propose in the book chapter are some of the ideas of what can be done, but there can be other ideas. And I also invite student teachers to reflect on how investing in their professional capital will help them to become a better teacher, because that's very relevant in what Harris and presents when he talks about professional capital. And then I ask them to think about some examples of collaborative professionalism that they have experienced, even from the examples that they have seen or that they can see from their professors. Then identify their own needs and interests, like if they want to start learning about how to teach pronunciation, how to develop communication skills, writing skills, okay. And search for opportunities to collaborate from a very early stage that can be in the bachelor's. My recommendations in the book chapter, I have like 5, but I really wanted to focus on research CBS because it's something that very appropriate for students in their bachelor's, and lesson study groups. Like even when they have to plan this micro teaching for their classes, they can start to work together, and this will help them to start moving towards this collaborative professionalism, even from their teaching education programs. And these are the references. If you have, I hope we have some space for sharing and questions or comments. Thank you.
Diana, thank you very much. This was indeed very interesting. Please take down your PowerPoint so that we can see everybody here. And we have time for 1 or 2 short questions because this one again went over just a little bit. And I'm making sure that the presentation and the questions don't go beyond 15 minutes. Okay, so when you were yourself as a pre-service teacher, did you even think about doing collaborative professionalism? Or how many years into your profession was it before you realized that this would be important?
No, I never thought about that because in fact, collaborative professionalism is a very new concept. It just came in the book of Harris and O'Connor in 2018. So I never thought about collaborative professionalism in terms of the term itself, but I was engaged when I was a student, a pre-service teacher. I was invited by a professor of mine to start learning to do research at a moment where my own bachelor's didn't include research courses in the curriculum. That was a long time ago. Now the curriculum has research courses. And that was fundamental for me, like starting to learn to do research and to work with other peers from my pre-service stage was fundamental from who I became as a teacher and then in my further studies. That has been very fundamental, and that's one of the reasons why I believe in this and why I recommend this even for pre-service teachers in their bachelor's.
Wonderful, because your presentation made a great follow-up from Aracelis, and it just happened to be that both of you chose the same time slot. So this is excellent. We're going to move on now, go up to the United States and hear from Lynn Fuller in Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi.
Good morning, everyone. Well, I guess good day. I know that it's not morning for everyone, but I'm here today to talk about strategies to teach integrated skills. My background is I'm currently a secondary teacher for grades 9 through 12 in Madison County, Mississippi. The chapter that I'm talking about specifically is on teaching strategies. So we've been talking a lot about research, and mine is the more practical. What do you do in the classroom? So when investigating this topic, the first thing I thought about is really why do we need language? What about language is important? Well, it's we do so many things with it, but primarily we're using it to interact with others and to communicate. Going all the way back to what Kaylin was saying at the beginning, language is about transferring meaning. So in language, we also know that we have speaking, listening, reading, and writing. And very often we're focusing in on those skills and determining where students are in each of them as they go along. But teachers must really understand how these are related. We know this because when we're assessing skills for each student, they have to listen in order to speak, and they have to read in order to write. And so all of these things are interconnected. And when in our teaching, it's really beneficial to focus on how we can help students practice these skills together in an integrated fashion. While we're doing this, what is really important about everything is that we're focusing on authentic language that they're going to use, whether the student's purpose in learning is academic, or if it's social, they're wanting to get a job. Whatever the purpose is, we need to focus on what language will they need in the world in order to produce the meaning that they have in their head. So to think back on where things have come from in language, in the past, we've often focused on isolated skills. If you think about back to those methodologies that were used early in language teaching, we had grammar translation method, we had audio-lingual method, and often those methods are really focused on just one part of language, and they're not overarching. So it's very good to think about how can we use these in order to integrate them better. If we integrate skills, students' fluency is going to improve, because by using their strengths in one skill, they can also help the skill that they're struggling with. We also need to be aware of the fact that students learn their language skills may develop differently. I know I'm dealing with teenagers, and there's a lot of affective filter issues going on because they're dealing with social pressure. So sometimes they may be hesitant to speak, and their speaking develops much more slowly. Or perhaps they really like speaking, but they have trouble concentrating. So their reading and writing develops more slowly. And but by helping students integrate the practice of the language in a classroom, then they can also help those other issues that they're dealing with at the same time. While they're practicing skills, they can also interpret their meaning while at the same time. So we're still focusing around the meaning of language and what are you trying to communicate. So in order to prepare this, there's a few things that you need to think about as a teacher. Like I said, this is a little more practical session than talking about research. But when you're preparing your class for learning, you need to think about, when I'm teaching this topic, how can we use two or more of the skills in the instruction and in the practice activities afterwards. When we learn, for example, grammar skills, we've been doing modals in my classroom. We learn them on paper, but then we immediately started practicing them in speaking. And then I gave them a text so that they could look through it and find examples of modals in an authentic text, something that they're using in another classroom. And we culminated with the writing. So when we learned one thing, we're able to use it in multiple skills. And then that topic is more deeply ingrained in their knowledge. The teaching approach should be chosen at the planning stage. So when you're thinking about what your lesson plans are and where things are, that's when you need to start thinking about integration of skills. If you're thinking about them as you're doing them, it's not going to be fully formed. But once again, you need to go back to thinking about what the goal of your students are. So like, for example, my students are in school, they're working towards a diploma. But I also teach adults, and the adults have different goals because they're trying to be able to use their skills on the job force. So how you plan your lesson is going to, should be developed based on the goals and motivations of the students. So as you're doing this, I have a few teaching suggestions that would be beneficial to using in the classroom. So first of all, as I said before, integration of skills requires thoughtful planning. Sitting down and thinking about how you're going to integrate these things. Now, like all types of planning, at first, this may take more time. But as you practice with this yourself and practice with creating plans that are set up this way, it becomes much easier. Building background is also important. If you're going to have students transfer their skills to other topics, then you may need to pre-teach a little bit of vocabulary, pre-teach some information in order for students to be able to use that more effectively. I always try to use real life situations to apply language. Going back to why are the students learning the language and using those examples. So in school, we're focusing primarily on using it in academic contexts. And so I'm modeling what they're doing in their math or their science class while we're also teaching language. And using all of the other language skills to support each other. If a student is struggling in reading, perhaps you can talk about the topic before you read in order to support their reading and support their understanding. So just to sort of begin to wrap up here, are things that you really need to remember about this. Integrating listening, reading, writing will benefit all of your language by supporting one part of your language. That will, by necessity, bleed over into the other skills. We can practice all the skills simultaneously in order to help students be able to be strong and fluent in their whole language and not just in one section. Students' goals are really important, and I can't stress this enough. This goes back into motivation. This goes back into desire to participate and to practice outside of class. If you know what it is that a student what the reason why the student desires to speak another language, creating activities that focus on that will benefit your classroom in general. Also, your skill expectations can be adjusted to your student level. So while you're dealing with advanced students, you can raise the level of what is expected out of them. Just as with beginning students, you're really focusing more on meaning and implementing those grammar skills or language fluency skills little by little. So a few questions that I want you to consider while you think about this. How can integrated skills enhance language production? We've thought about this, but I really want you to think about how this is in your classroom also. Why is building background important? I didn't really talk about that a lot, but I know there's a whole chapter in the text that discusses building background and how can providing students information prior to the lesson benefit their understanding and ability to use language? Why do students want to learn? What is their goal? How can integration help the students reach those goals? I have a few resources here that I highly recommend. The first here is a website of a classroom teacher that talks a lot about how he creates a language-rich classroom. He talks about a lot of topics on his website, so I would highly recommend that. If you're not familiar with the concept of building background knowledge, Coloring Colorado has a great resource about building background knowledge. And if you've never seen this in action, this last topic here is talking about how you looking at an example of an integrated lesson so that you can sort of use that as a model. I have a few references here. This is only a selection of the references I included, but each of these has multiple articles about the same topic, these same authors. So I would highly recommend looking up these authors and seeing seeing what you can learn from them. Thank you.
Lynn, thank you so very much. Could you take your slides down? Thank you. And I have a quick question for you because, again, yours went over a bit longer. Do you feel that every lesson that you're teaching that has all four of those skills, listening, speaking, reading, and writing? And if so, what's the key to this?
Like I said, I think the key to it really is planning. If you're not thinking about it ahead of time, and it's not just going to happen automatically, you're going to need to go ahead and think about, they may listen in the lesson, but is the listening really improving their language? So having those lessons that specifically focuses on certain skills can benefit them.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move on to Leslie Barrett. She cannot be here with us in person, but she did send a pre-recorded video. Entonces yo pido a los técnicos, por favor, que alcen el video de la profesora Leslie. While we're waiting for this to be shown, I'd just like to say that Dr. Barrett is retired. She's from the Indiana State University in the United States. She's currently traveling. I understand that she's in Brazil.
Hello.
Okay.
My name is Leslie Barrett, and I'm going to introduce to you my chapter in the diversity of global Englishes. My chapter's title is Understanding and Coping with English Variations. All languages vary. They vary naturally, and language variation is one of the major things that makes it difficult for learners. But understanding
A los técnicos, nosotros no escuchamos más lo que está diciendo la profesora. Desapareció el sonido. The sound has disappeared.
they encountered speakers of the languages that already existed here, such as Guarani, and the Spanish that is spoken here adapted many of the words and also some of the other characteristics of those indigenous or previous languages. But the languages also change naturally through time because each generation learns the language or acquires the language on their own. It is not something that is instructed to them. They are picking up the language from the people around them, and they'll hear all the variation and develop a new form, their own form, which is a combination of those variations. So, for example, the Spanish that you speak is not the same as the Spanish that was spoken by your great-grandparents, and your grandchildren or great-grandchildren will not speak the same Spanish as you either. Even siblings are picking up different varieties as they are encountering different people through their lives. As English has grown globally, it has varied globally, and we now speak about world Englishes, so that there are so many varieties of English. Just look at the varieties for something such as a pen drive, as you may call it in Paraguay, and other people call it jump drive, thumb drive, memory stick. There are over 100 terms for this device, and they vary by region and even locally. In order to deal with the variation of English in your own use of it, you need to take control of it. You need to own it. You need to have your own English and be proud of it, and guide your students to take control of their own learning as well and be proud of their own English. To do this, you can use internet tools. Many of these are through Google, and Google has searches such as Google Images, Trends, and Ngrams that can help you. I have many suggestions in the chapter of what to look for and how to use different kinds of searches. The teaching suggestions in the chapter are fairly extensive, but there are some steps involved in this. First, examine the teaching materials for bias toward the variety of the authors and the publishers. Each textbook is written in a specific country and by authors, and it will have a bias and use that bias in its teaching. It may present only a single form as correct, but you can point this out if you include this variation in your lesson planning, and you can have students search for other varieties or ask them if they've heard other forms for this. You can also use teachable moments, by which I mean things that come up spontaneously, such as a student question or something you just think of at the moment as you're teaching. And these can be brought in. You can do a spontaneous search using Google, ask the students to bring out their phones and so forth. But of course, you want to encourage students to search independently as well, because they're going to be lifelong learners of the language. In addition, they're going to meet people who speak different Englishes, and they need to learn to negotiate meaning across those Englishes. They need to have strategies to deal with misunderstandings and to ask questions and so forth. In order to do this, one of the best ways is to expose students to multiple varieties as we're teaching them to negotiate meaning. Key concepts to remember are that English has no global or general standard. Each standard is only local. No English-speaking country has ever developed a standard for that country. And those teaching materials will apply a local standard. If they tell you there's one way to say something and another way is incorrect, you should question that and see if speakers in other places also use that or don't and use something else. But all speakers use the appropriate language for their own context, and we need to teach students to do that. We also need to teach them how to search for the appropriate language. And finally, we need to teach them the communication strategies that I spoke of previously. Specific techniques for doing this are to have students research Paraguayan English and let them ask their own questions about it. In order to do that, they need to have the freedom to look on the internet. And perhaps they want to ask group questions. In addition, we might have them consider what is local English, what is Paraguayan English, and what is an error. So if we say, I have 20 years, is that Paraguayan English and South American English, or is that an error? I don't have an opinion about that. It's a matter of something that they need to discuss and decide for themselves as teachers of English. We can provide videos of local news from different countries, and we can have students record themselves and identify their own communication strategies that they already use, and perhaps ones that they're not using yet. To expand further, I've given you some resources. A good way to connect with other speakers of English is to do that through Paraguay TESOL and other groups, worldwide groups as well. And here are the references.
Okay, I would like to take this moment to really thank Dr. Barrett. She's not here, but she'll be watching this later. She was one of the colleagues that we reached out to when Valentina and I were in the early stages of designing the book. We reached out to Leslie and asked for advice about many of the different stages we went through. She was also very kind to collaborate in being the first one to provide a chapter, which was this chapter, that could serve as sort of a guide for everyone else. So if you do have any questions for Dr. Barrett, she did list her email at the end, and we could also provide it to you if you wish. But she was very interested in exactly how is English used in Paraguay and provided different examples in her chapter. It's a very interesting one, so please do read. Now, for the last presentation will be mine, and I'm going to share my screen, so just a moment. Okay. So it's my pleasure to speak about speaking. This chapter that I wrote is about something that is very passionate. I'm very passionate about getting students to speak as of the first day in class. We know there's some challenges to doing that. My chapter is number 40 of the 55 in the book. It's in the same section called Teaching Strategies, or the same division that Lynn Fuller's chapter was in. Mine specifically on speaking, and then there are other chapters such as listening, reading, writing, and Lynn's chapter ties that together with integrated. My approach to teaching speaking is to use interactive peer-to-peer oral techniques, which I have kind of coined as iPods, because we need to provide opportunities for students to speak in order for them to speak. So, with the 4 language skills, as I mentioned, when I first came to the University of Alabama at Birmingham, which was now almost 20 years ago, and I'd be observing student teachers and teacher interns who were preparing to become teachers of English as a second language. And even though I was trying to, in the lessons I was teaching and in the courses that we taught, to get these future teachers to use oral techniques in their classroom, I just didn't see that many lesson plans had incorporated oral techniques, or a lot of them. And that the attempts that they were trying to use in their classrooms didn't get necessarily their English learners to speaking. It didn't generate student talk among one another in English. And so this peer-to-peer interaction was missing. And I asked them, why didn't you do that? And they knew I was going to observe that day. Wouldn't you think that they would have students speaking when I'm coming to observe? And they said, oh, we did that yesterday. We're going to do that tomorrow. And I said, well, you have to do that every day. Oh, well, our principal likes quiet classrooms. Well, this is a language classroom. You have to talk. So I realized that they weren't prioritizing speaking. So I thought, well, maybe if I could come up with a catchy name. And so I came up with this name, Interactive Peer-to-Peer Oral Techniques, with the acronym iPods. And that was about at the time when iPods was coming out. I thought, well, maybe they can remember they were all buying an iPod. So let's talk about iPods. Just something tricky there. So we have to remember, though, that students, when they're first learning a new language, go through a type of silent period when they're trying to listen and trying to understand. And depending on their personality, might not be willing to talk. But there's this thing, the affective filter, that if they feel, if they don't feel comfortable, they're not going to talk. They have to have a supportive environment. And we need to make sure that they're not overly nervous or overly inhibited about talking. We have to give them opportunities, not to talk in front of the whole class, but with one another in pairs. Speaking includes vocabulary, structure, sound. So we have to be giving them the tools to allow them to talk. We have to provide structured activities. And, we can call it a learning activity. If it's fun, they call it a game. And they go, oh, language class is so fun to go to. All we do are games. They don't realize that the games are learning experiences. So that's the way that you can get all of this and get them to talking as well. Has to be fun and engaging, but also include some repetition, but in an authentic way. And arrange the activities so that it matches the students' ages and interests. So we have to think about positive relationships that we're building, and several chapters in the book focus on relationships of different types. And Lynn Fuller mentioned the same thing. You need to have this relationship. You have to make sure it's comprehensible input, just a little bit above what they already know. Create pairs and small groups and have them mixing in different ways. Provide an example. Just don't say, talk. That's not going to work. Model it. Have visuals and manipulative so they can be using their hands, and graphic organizers. All of this will help with speaking. Now, in the chapter, I talk about several iPods, a turn and tell, where I say, okay, Lynn and Deanna talk to one another, and I form pairs, and they talk, and they explain. Because if you're doing a lot of talking, they can't talk. So you can't talk very much as a teacher if you want the teacher's students to talk. Adding to the circle, you can say, well, this weekend, I went to the zoo, and then the next person said, oh, this weekend Susan went to the zoo and I went to the circus. And the next one says, Susan went to the zoo, I went to the circus, Mary went to the circus, and I went to watch a football game. And so they're adding on to the next person and repeating in a type of authentic way. This you can see done in Cub Scouts and many other social groups. So if it's done in social groups, it's authentic, and it can be done in the classroom. And it gives that repetition, listening, speaking, and then repeating. Imaginary photo album. I talk about the fact that you can, instead of saying bring pictures to talk about the families, they can draw 3 shapes, just, 3 little boxes, empty, and then they can pretend, oh, this is a box. This one here is that my imaginary photo of my family, and you see my mother and my father. I have a baby brother, and this is what we're doing in that picture. And so they just have in front of them a piece of paper, and they have maybe a pencil or their finger that they're pointing at these 3 shapes that they drew that might have been from a photo album. But of course, we have phones now with photos on them and not necessarily a photo album. But still, they're then thinking about concepts and not necessarily spending time drawing. Information gap. You have different blanks that you leave, and first one person talks and the other one's filling in the blanks. They go back and forth. It's, again, hard to explain just in a few seconds here, but we'll describe each of these in detail in the chapter, and also provide links where you can go get more information. Parallel lines. You form 2 lines. 10 students looking at 10 students, and they're all talking in pairs simultaneously. So you've got 20 students or 12 students or 30, however many are in your class. Half are talking at the same time, half are listening. You're maximizing the amount of time used for them to use language. Or they can have an inside circle and an outside circle. Another way to do it is roaming reporters. They use a 3x5 card, and they write a couple questions, and they go around the room asking questions to one another. You ask yourself, well, isn't that chaos? They're all doing something different. They're all walking around, and you know what? They'll love it. They've got the freedom. They've got specific questions they're asking. Maybe they're filling out a chart, but they're using language authentically, and you have a way to bring them back. And these activities that I've just explained, I've had teachers graduate students of mine who are then practicing these in the classrooms, and they've had an observation by their principal, and the principal has been so excited about these activities that they asked that teacher then to share it with the rest of the teachers in the building. So these are things that when you have them well organized and well planned, they will go a long ways to allowing students to talk. And the way to learn to talk is by talking, not by listening. Puppets. Puppets are a favorite. You can have them just hands. You can have a sock on it. You can have clothespins that they move up and down. Whatever it is, you can even just have them hold up a pen and say, this is my puppet. And when a child is learning, or adult is learning a second language, they might feel inhibited about talking. But when you have a puppet talking, even though that puppet is just a stick or an object, then the child or the learner doesn't feel as inhibited, because if the puppet makes a mistake, it's the puppet's fault and not the person talking for the puppet. So the shy people, the shy students, have a tendency to talk more. So you could have, now if we're going to review this, you can also use iPods to review. I can have a close activity, which is there's a space, empty, a line showing a gap on a sentence. And instead of having, you give 5 sentences or 10 sentences, and it could be the concepts that you've been teaching. But instead of having them fill it out silently, have them work in pairs, talk about what is the missing word, and they negotiate. And so already you can take an activity that was maybe thought to be just silent, one-on-one in writing and listening, reading and writing, but turn it into a speaking and listening activity, plus reading and writing. Or you can put charts around the room and they can go from chart to chart and you divide them into groups and they can write what they learned about the lesson. You can have matching and sequencing and manipulatives, because when there's manipulatives and they're moving them around on the desk, it makes speaking easier. They're not just concentrating on the talking, they're concentrating on what they're doing. Bring in chants and songs and rap, and they love that. That's not one-on-one, but that's a whole group. You have them make up their own chant or their own rap. Whatever the type of music is or the activities are that age group is doing at that moment in time, is what they enjoy doing also in your language class. Now, another favorite is a hot onion review. And here I could have different topics that I want, and I make them, and I can print them out or I can handwrite them. But then what I do is I make a paper ball like this. And I used to call it the paper ball review. And then they said, no, that's like a hot potato because you're throwing it around. And then somebody said, well, the fact that you're unraveling it, it's like an onion. So I'm going to throw this, and I'm going to just say, and I've done this also virtually. So I'm going to throw it. I'm throwing this one at Lynn. Lynn, put up your hands because you're going to catch it. Okay, Lynn, catch it. All right, got it. Now, Lynn, what you're going to talk about is turn and tell. How do you do a turn and tell?
When you give the students a question and they turn to the other person and they discuss the question, each taking a turn.
Each taking a turn. Good. Who are you going to throw the hot onion to now? Because all of you are standing in a circle looking at one another. So who are you going to throw it to?
I'm going to throw it to Diana.
Diane. So Diana, put out your hands. All right. You got your hands out? I'm throwing it to you right now. Okay. Catch it. Did you catch it? Good.
Got it.
Good. You got it. Diane, can you tell us what parallel lines are? How do you use parallel lines to get students to talk?
Yeah, I have tried it, but I call it like speed dating. So they are one-on-one.
Yes.
And I provide like a list of topics, and I say like, okay, 2 minutes to talk about this question. Now, 2 minutes about this question, and they interact. That's very good.
Okay, good. And we could go on, but I even provided this to show you that this, and they love this, the hot onion review. So then please read chapter 40 when you get the book. We hope to have it out in January. Try these iPods in your class, and don't get discouraged if something doesn't work the first time. Keep trying. Give it a name so that every time, like if Diana says, we're going to do speed dating, they go, oh, good. They know exactly what it is. Or if I say we're going to do parallel lines, they know what it is. Create based on authentic interactions, bring it into your classroom. And in my chapter, I talk about sharing, participating, researching, Googling, attending, joining, interacting, giving conference presentations. All of this is going to help make you an even better language teacher. So with that, at the end of my presentation, we have 5 minutes left in this 1.5 hour session. And do you have any questions for me or for Valentina or for anyone here? Or comments? Doesn't have to be a question. The floor is open. Anybody? I would like to thank all of the authors for having written these chapters. There are 55 chapters written by 61 authors from 9 different countries. This has been a phenomenal undertaking. Valentina shared this idea with me a year ago and asked me to be a co-editor of the book. And in December, we sent out the call for chapters. And now we've received them all. We've edited them all. They're now being edited again and reviewed again by a professional editor so that we can have the very highest quality of this book. It will be published as Creative Commons by the National University of Asunción, Facultad de Filosofía. And I see that Valentina has come in. She's raised her hand, and let's hear from the editor.
Well, I would just like to thank everyone, most especially Susan, for this wonderful work that she's been doing with, collaborating, and especially also thank all of you for your contribution and for sharing this contribution in this event. For us is very important. Many of our teachers have been asking already when the book is coming out. So hopefully we'll be able to have it out as soon as possible. Like I said last night, the book almost doubled in size from the original idea. So this is why it's going to take a little bit longer to fine tune all the details before getting it out. But it is almost ready, and I just want to give a big thank to all of you once again for your wonderful contributions, and also to Susan for also being such a great co-editor in this journey.
Thank you, Valentina, for your input. Lynn, Diana, Araceli, do you have anything else you would like to add? We've got 2 more minutes.
I just would like to thank you, Susan and Valentina, for organizing such a great work. You were very organized, planning, putting us together, editing, giving comments. So congratulations for this great job that you did, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Diana. We're thrilled to have people from so many different countries with the different ideas that you presented. And once this is published in Paraguay as Creative Commons, we hope that all of you who are watching here now and later will include these chapters in your own teaching for preparing future teachers, and also for the professional development of current teachers, that you include this in your syllabi. The benefit of Creative Commons is that it can help the whole world. We go from filling our local need in Paraguay last year, that the faculty members in the English department at the university said, we need materials for our need. And by filling the local need in Paraguay with people from international perspectives, it also is filling an international need. And that makes it local and global. All right. Any other comments? Valentina.
One last thing. I just, we have the call for proposals for our national grant for Paraguayan grants. And I'm thinking maybe if you have other grant opportunities, I'm thinking maybe we can research how this book, once it comes out, how it's, being applied and used in teacher education programs, all over the place. So maybe we can think about that, and we can think about together to see how we can not only just have the book, but also how the book is being used, and maybe how the book can be, adjusted or improved upon.
Yes, that's an excellent idea. And one idea I have for research too, once we get the book out, is I want to contact all the authors and get their perspective, why they joined, why they're contributing, and how they're using it. So I'd like to do a smaller study just on the authors, and Valentina, you can do the bigger study, how it's used by other universities. Okay. So with that, it's 7:30 in the morning where I'm at, which means it's 10:30 in Paraguay. And also our Australian presenter went to bed a long time ago. She presented first and went to bed. Okay. So I want to say goodbye to everybody. Thank you for coming to this presentation. And now we're turning the screen over to the next people that are on. Okay, bye-bye. Bye,
thank you very much. Bueno, cambiamos al español. Tenemos ya con nosotros a nuestro próximo, nuestra próxima, déjenme ver aquí en el programa lo que tenemos programado para la siguiente. Tenemos justamente ya nuestro conferencista que está en la sala. No sé si la profesora Gloria Medina, que va a estar moderando, ahí ya está. Buen día, profesora. Buen día, profesor Ricardo. Mucho gusto en tenerlos con nosotros. Es para nosotros un honor tenerlos aquí y poder compartir con usted esta mañana. Adelante, profesora Gloria.
Muchas gracias, profesora Valentina. Muy buenos días a todos. Buenos días, profesor Ricardo Conet. Muy agradecidos por su presencia y por su participación en este Congreso Paraguayo, tercer Congreso Paraguayo de Lingüística Aplicada. Bueno, el doctor Ricardo Conet nos va a hablar sobre la construcción de las identidades políticas en el discurso populista de Hugo Chávez. Un análisis basado en los estudios del discurso asistido por corpus. El doctor Ricardo Conet es doctor en Lingüística Hispánica por la Universidad de Zaragoza, con mención internacional y sobresaliente cum laude en el 2021. Ha realizado una estancia de investigación predoctoral en la Université Catholique de Louvain, Bélgica, 2019-2020. Asimismo, ha obtenido el título de máster en literaturas hispánicas y lengua española en el 2016 por la misma universidad y la licenciatura en idiomas modernos en el 2015 por la Universidad Arturo Michelena de Venezuela. Sus principales líneas de investigación son el análisis del discurso, la gramática y pragmática del discurso en español y la fraseología en español. Ha presentado artículos, comunicaciones y pósteres científicos en congresos internacionales, jornadas académicas y revistas en España y en otros países europeos y de América Latina. Es miembro de la Asociación Italiana de Fraseología y Paremiología desde 2021 y primer consejero de la misma desde septiembre de 2022. Entonces, nos quedamos con el doctor Ricardo Conet.
Profesora Gloria, por su amable presentación. ¿Se me escucha bien?
Sí, perfecto.
Sí, perfecto. Voy a compartir la pantalla ahora. No sé si se ve ya. ¿Sí? ¿Se ve ya mi pantalla?
Se ve.
Ok, perfecto. Bueno, muy buenos días a todos. Buenos días a los que están en América. Buenas tardes a los que estamos aquí en Europa. Quiero ante todo agradecer profundamente al comité organizador de este interesantísimo tercer Congreso Paraguayo de Lingüística Aplicada por haber tenido la gentileza de invitarme a participar como conferencista en él. Como bien ha indicado la profesora Medina, el título de mi ponencia es la construcción de las identidades políticas en el discurso populista de Hugo Chávez, un análisis basado en los estudios del discurso asistido por corpus. Y en ella me planteo el objetivo de mostrar y analizar la forma, las maneras en las que el mencionado líder político, Hugo Chávez, construye discursivamente las identidades políticas a partir de un corpus de textos emitidos por él. Antes de presentar el análisis del corpus que aquí someto a estudio, es necesario advertir una cuestión que yo creo que para nadie es un secreto, que yo creo que todos estamos conscientes de ello, y es que la figura de Hugo Chávez es considerada de forma prácticamente unánime por la bibliografía especializada como un representante prototípico, clásico, de lo que denominamos populismo. En esto coincide realmente, prácticamente, toda la bibliografía especializada en este tema, bibliografía politológica, sociológica, filosófica, histórica y por supuesto también en lo que tiene que ver con análisis del discurso. Más concretamente, se trata de un líder populista de izquierda, representante más importante de lo que diversos autores y el propio líder en cuestión denominaron en su momento el socialismo del siglo XXI. De manera que esta idea central, desde esta idea central parte el análisis, como pueden ustedes ya ver o podían ver desde el título de esta ponencia. En cuanto a la estructura de la presentación, va a ser la siguiente. En primer lugar, voy a explicar el marco teórico haciendo una serie de aclaraciones sobre la naturaleza del populismo que incluye un breve estado de la cuestión sobre el tema, una propuesta de definición del populismo como fenómeno discursivo, que es la concepción que vamos a adoptar en este estudio, y una descripción de los rasgos fundamentales del discurso populista, centrándome sobre todo en el antagonismo entre nosotros y ellos, que, como argumentaré, es uno de los rasgos principales o fundamentales de los populistas o de los políticos, de los emisores que calificamos bajo esta etiqueta de populista. Pasaré luego a exponer brevemente el marco teórico para el estudio, así como acto seguido haré una descripción del corpus sometido a análisis para pasar ya a dicho análisis y finalizaré, como es debido, con una serie de conclusiones tras este. Bueno, lo primero que hay que decir cuando hablamos de populismo es que este concepto, este término, contrae mucha polémica, mucha controversia. Hay un intenso debate académico en torno a este. Sintetizando muchísimo, porque por cuestiones de tiempo no puedo extenderme lo que quisiera sobre esto, pero sintetizando muchísimo, ya si quieren luego en la ronda de preguntas y en las intervenciones, al final si tenemos tiempo, por supuesto, podríamos discutir sobre este interesante tema del populismo. Bueno, lo que hay que decir es que se ha concebido, o el populismo ha sido estudiado principalmente como ideología delgada, podríamos decir en primer lugar. Se habla de el populismo como ideología delgada. Thin-centered ideology es el término que se usa en inglés. Es la teoría de Moody, que dice, prácticamente lo que plantea es que el populismo es una suerte de ideología delgada que debe adosarse a una ideología que podríamos llamar gruesa, thick ideology, o podríamos llamar clásica, como pueden ser el socialismo, el comunismo, el fascismo, el liberalismo, etc. Otra manera de concebir el populismo es concebirlo como estilo. Algunos autores hablan de estilo político, otros hablan de estilo comunicativo. Y una tercera forma, digo ya sintetizando muchísimo porque esto es mucho más complejo, se concibe también el populismo como discurso. Y en esta concepción, a partir de esta concepción, es que vamos a analizar el discurso de Chávez. Se habla del discurso, del populismo como discurso, de narrativa política. Esto es la clásica definición, la clásica concepción del populismo de Ernesto Laclau, también de marco discursivo. Aslanis y otros autores hablan en este sentido sobre el populismo, y también un numeroso grupo de investigadores, dentro de los cuales me incluyo, que consideramos simplemente el populismo como un fenómeno puramente discursivo. Muy bien, pues en el marco de dicha concepción teórica, yo he propuesto definir el populismo en los siguientes términos que tienen ustedes en pantalla. El populismo es un fenómeno discursivo que se produce en las sociedades que experimentan una grave crisis social, económica o política, y en las que surge, a causa de ella, la figura de un líder, puede ser un emisor individual, encarnado en una figura personal, o de un conjunto de líderes, un emisor colectivo, encarnado en todo un partido o movimiento político, poseedor de un fuerte carisma, quien se presenta a sí mismo como la representación de un pueblo victimizado y exaltado por este, que no es escuchado frente al enemigo causante de lo que dicha figura describe como una situación catastrófica. Yo aquí subrayo resalto lo de la victimización de este pueblo y la descripción o la descripción catastrófica de la situación en la que éste se encuentra, porque eso vamos a ver que tiene una importancia muy, muy grande en lo que es el discurso. La figura populista se manifiesta, por tanto, como una solución inmediata o inmediatista y de urgencia a la crisis que denuncia, y se caracteriza por presentar siempre a un nivel excesivo 3 rasgos discursivos fundamentales, que son los que vamos a ver a continuación. En primer lugar, un antagonismo entre un nosotros y un ellos, o entre un endogrupo, podríamos decir, y un exogrupo. En segundo lugar, la afectividad verbal, y en tercer lugar, una abierta y deliberada descortesía verbal hacia el oponente político. Es preciso advertir al respecto que estos rasgos se aprecian o se presentan en el discurso muchas veces de forma simultánea, en un mismo fragmento textual, y eso lo vamos a ver también, pero destaco de estos 3 sobre todo el antagonismo, porque es el rasgo que se encuentra o en el que se centra esta investigación. ¿En qué consiste esto del antagonismo entre nosotros y ellos? Bueno, básicamente consiste en una dicotomización de parte del emisor del campo político entre nosotros y ellos, o entre el endogrupo y el exogrupo, o entre los pros y los antis, o entre los de arriba y los de abajo. Es decir, es una lógica política, que diría Ernesto Laclau. Obviamente, esto no es algo único, exclusivo del discurso populista, sino del lenguaje y del discurso político en general, pero que en el caso de los emisores populistas, como nos recuerda Chagodot, son rasgos que son llevados al paroxismo, a la exageración. Es de vital importancia también advertir que estos entes enfrentados, este endogrupo, nosotros, y este exogrupo o ellos, no están definidos a priori, es decir, no están dados de antemano ni poseen una identidad predeterminada por la ideología, sino que deben ser construidos discursivamente, es decir, en la propia praxis discursiva, los va construyendo, como veremos, y configurando el líder populista en cuestión. A propósito de esta construcción de antagonismo, cabría hacer una reflexión recordando las palabras del gran estudioso del discurso, Patrick Chagodot, a quien tienen en pantalla, palabras que básicamente nos explican la importancia de la construcción simultánea de parte del emisor de ambos entes, tanto del nosotros como del ellos. Dice Chagodot en uno de sus trabajos, lo dice también en muchos otros, la conciencia de la existencia de sí mismo depende de la percepción de la existencia del otro y de su mirada. Esto es lo que se conoce en análisis del discurso, en pragmática, como el principio de alteridad, que el autor francés incluye en el marco de lo que él llama la problemática de la influencia, la problemática de cómo nosotros influimos en el pensamiento a través de la argumentación, de la persuasión y de la seducción, por medio de la palabra, en el destinatario o en el receptor de nuestro mensaje. Muy bien, aclarado el marco teórico, y partiendo de este marco teórico propuesto, tenemos una pregunta de investigación que debemos plantearnos, y es la siguiente: ¿cómo construye Hugo Chávez las identidades políticas enfrentadas por él en el antagonismo entre nosotros y ellos? Para responder a esta pregunta, debemos adoptar una metodología que, bueno, aquí ya ustedes lo saben por el título de la presentación, se trata de los llamados Corpus Assisted Discourse Studies, traducido en español normalmente como estudios del discurso asistido por corpus, porque su objetivo es, en palabras de sus propios teóricos, de sus propios proponentes, el que tienen en pantalla en inglés y que yo traduciría más o menos así en español: el descubrimiento en el tipo de discurso sometido a estudio, que en nuestro caso es el discurso político populista, de significados que a primera vista no parecen obvios, es decir, que pueden pasar desapercibidos en nuestra lectura de los datos. Se trata en definitiva de una metodología un tipo de estudio que integra los análisis cuantitativo y cualitativo al introducir en él métodos propios de la lingüística de corpus, del discurso del emisor político en cuestión, que en nuestro caso es el expresidente de Venezuela, Hugo Chávez. Muy bien, pues paso ahora a describir y definir lo que es el corpus que vamos a analizar. Debo decir, ante todo, que este corpus procede directamente de mi tesis doctoral, que fue defendida el año pasado. Lo digo porque aquí no tengo tiempo de extenderme acerca de las características y de la compilación, del proceso de compilación del corpus, pero sí lo describo y es un corpus que se compone de 6 discursos, todos ellos son textos orales, fueron emitidos en diferentes momentos de la trayectoria de Hugo Chávez como presidente de Venezuela, es decir, entre 1999 y 2013, y contiene un total de 34.640 palabras, que se distribuyen, como pueden ustedes apreciar en el gráfico, de la siguiente manera. La mayoría de las palabras se insertan o forman parte de mítines de campaña electoral, de discursos ante las masas. Otra parte menor se trata de discursos que fueron emitidos ante un organismo oficial de carácter nacional, que en nuestro caso es la Asamblea Nacional de Venezuela, que es el órgano legislativo del país, y una parte mucho más pequeña tiene que ver con un discurso que pronunció Hugo Chávez ante un organismo oficial internacional como es la ONU. Muy bien, pues aclarado esto, como digo, ya podemos discutir luego si tenemos tiempo, vamos a pasar a lo que es el análisis. Muy bien, cuando vemos este gráfico circular y esta tabla que lo acompaña, lo primero que hay que destacar es que una de las formas más visibles que nos permite ver más nítidamente esta búsqueda de la identidad del endogrupo de un emisor político es observar una clase de palabra concreta que éste emplea para su designación. Se trata, por supuesto, como pueden ver, del sustantivo. Y en este gráfico, en la tabla que lo acompaña, pueden apreciar los sustantivos de uso más frecuente que se registran en el corpus de Chávez para designar a ese nosotros, a ese endogrupo. Podemos apreciar allí claramente que el sustantivo Venezuela es el más frecuente para ello, algo que no debería sorprender, pues la pronunciación del propio nombre del país que el líder político gobierna y quiere seguir gobernando es esperable en un corpus de las características que posee el que aquí manejamos. El segundo sustantivo más recurrente en el discurso de Chávez para designar a nosotros viene a coincidir con uno de los elementos léxico-semánticos mayormente asociados a todo tipo de populismo, como es la palabra pueblo. En este sentido, hemos de decir que no solo es esperable este sustantivo, sino que al estar ubicado en el segundo lugar dentro de la lista, muestra a Chávez como un populista clásico, en el sentido de que la apelación directa y explícita al pueblo es la máxima expresión del lenguaje populista, como ustedes ya sabrán. Algo similar podemos decir del sustantivo patria, cuyo significante constituye solamente una variación del significado que contiene Venezuela y en buena parte también de pueblo. Podríamos decir que patria se encuentra en tercer lugar porque se manifiesta como una suerte de combinación semántica, digamos, de lo que los sustantivos Venezuela y pueblo denotan. Encontramos ya diferencias a partir de la palabra del sustantivo revolución, pues esta palabra posee un marcado matiz ideológico o doctrinal. Los otros dos sustantivos que aparecen en el gráfico y en la tabla son expresiones metafóricas que veremos también que contraen alta carga doctrinal ideológica. Me refiero a avalancha y a huracán. Bueno, hemos visto en el gráfico anterior los sustantivos, pero en realidad lo que nos da realmente información acerca de la búsqueda de la identidad de parte de Chávez son las palabras que acompañan con mayor frecuencia a estos sustantivos. En concreto, el gráfico de red que ahora ven en pantalla muestra en color turquesa los sustantivos que veíamos en el gráfico anterior, y en color rosado dos elementos modificadores que a mi juicio resultan altamente reveladores de la identidad de ese nosotros que Chávez construye. Son los adyacentes adjetivos del nombre y los sintagmas preposicionales complementos del nombre. Así tenemos en pantalla combinaciones de palabras que constituyen las formas nominales predilectas, no todas, pero predilectas, de Chávez para la designación del nosotros. Vemos en primer lugar, vemos, pero yo sé que el gráfico está un poco, las palabras están un poco pequeñas y tal vez no se puede ver perfectamente. Yo he hecho lo que he podido para que pueda caber en la diapositiva, pero vemos que las expresiones metafóricas que sirven como núcleo de la forma o sintagma nominal que designan nosotros, es decir, huracán y avalancha, se combinan mayoritariamente con un adjetivo de marcado contenido semántico doctrinal como es bolivariano, con la figura de Simón Bolívar. A su vez, este adjetivo bolivariano presenta la más elevada frecuencia absoluta como complemento de diversos nombres, en concreto con revolución y pueblo, además de con huracán y avalancha. Otro adjetivo muy recurrente en Chávez, en este caso conlleva un sello identitario al tratarse de un gentilicio, es venezolano, combinado, como es esperable, de forma mayoritaria con pueblo y, en menor medida, pero también esperable, con patria. El sintagma nominal, el sintagma preposicional de Venezuela es complemento, como pueden ver en el gráfico, únicamente, y no por ello pocas veces, del nombre pueblo, el pueblo de Venezuela, algo que también pues cabría esperar en estos casos. Por otro lado, observamos que los adjetivos socialista y nuevo se asocian con el sustantivo Venezuela, siendo nuevo el más frecuente, lo que nos permite apreciar e interpretar la importancia que para Chávez tiene la construcción de un nuevo país que, si bien está claramente basado en un proyecto político, ideológico, se trata de otra Venezuela, una Venezuela diferente, una Venezuela que pretende romper con las prácticas del pasado, otro de los rasgos también o de las características también del discurso político populista. Esto último lo podemos también notar en formas nominales como patria independiente y patria joven, que en nuestro corpus aparecen con la misma frecuencia absoluta, o en el sintagma Venezuela Nueva con una frecuencia absoluta prácticamente similar a la de los dos sintagmas nominales anteriores. Por último, advertimos que si bien los sintagmas preposicionales de pueblo y de Chávez están siempre asociados a dos sustantivos que constituyen expresiones metafóricas como huracán y avalancha. También lo doctrinal y en concreto lo relacionado con Bolívar, todo eso predomina en el discurso de Chávez sin descuidar, por supuesto, que lo estrictamente ideológico también es una forma de designar nosotros nominalmente. Piénsese, por ejemplo, en revolución socialista. Vamos a ver ahora algunas de dichas formas nominales, digo algunas porque obviamente hay muchas más, de dichos sintagmas designativos de nosotros y su contexto, es decir, el texto o el fragmento de discurso en el cual estas formas nominales, sintagmas, se insertan. Vemos en el ejemplo 1, huracán bolivariano y revolución bolivariana, dos formas nominales designativas del nosotros, que reflejan o que podríamos interpretar como un grupo marcado doctrinalmente, marcado por la doctrina de Bolívar, por la doctrina bolivariana, que también es una suerte de ideología, ¿no?, en el discurso de Hugo Chávez. En el caso de 2, cuando Chávez dice, vamos pues compatriotas, el huracán bolivariano a la carga, a la batalla, a la victoria, vemos que es una especie se comporta como una especie de protagonista agónico, dado que este huracán bolivariano lucha y resiste ante la jornada electoral, ante la oposición. Vemos también aquí en el ejemplo 2, sobre todo, una clara metaforización bélica una clara militarización del lenguaje político de parte de Chávez, probablemente o lógicamente más bien porque pues él, como es sabido, era un líder militar. En 3 vemos la revolución socialista, vemos aquí también el protagonista agónico que continúa luchando con la ofensiva, vemos la militarización del lenguaje y en el caso de 4, cuando Chávez dice que nada ni nadie le robará el futuro al pueblo de Venezuela, a la patria venezolana, a la juventud venezolana, vemos que es una especie también aquí de víctima, este nuevo grupo, de una situación catastrófica, que es otro rasgo importante del discurso populista. Luego en 5 vemos también el sintagma Venezuela nueva, cuando Chávez dice que se siente llegar, dice Chávez grande y bonita, hermosa, la Venezuela nuestra. Aquí el posesivo también tiene un valor persuasivo importante. La Venezuela nueva, nuestra y nueva. Aquí se presenta más bien este nuevo grupo en el discurso de Chávez como una fuerza emergente, dado que pues, es nueva y es joven y rompe con las prácticas políticas del pasado que repudia. Vemos también una clara valoración afectiva de la descripción del endogrupo y esto, como recordarán, es el segundo rasgo fundamental del populismo. Ya les digo que todos estos rasgos se van presentando de forma simultánea. Insisto en esta idea. Pasamos ahora a ver la otra cara de la moneda, es decir, la construcción de parte de Chávez del exogrupo o del ellos. Apreciamos enseguida que este gráfico es muy diferente al de nosotros. Vemos que estas formas, estos sustantivos, en este caso el primer gráfico del ellos, contiene elementos léxicos mucho más variados, heterogéneos y numerosos. Podemos observar en primer lugar un claro predominio de las voces burguesía y candidato. El caso de candidato es esperable debido a que la mayoría de los discursos son de campaña electoral. Y este sustantivo de candidato, como se verá a continuación, se nutre de diversos adjetivos y sintagmas preposicionales, algo que, bueno, es obviamente también muy esperable. El uso del sustantivo burguesía, por el contrario, no necesariamente es esperable en todo emisor político, ni siquiera en todo emisor político populista. Se trata claramente de un elemento léxico-semántico basado en la ideología de Hugo Chávez, donde la palabra burguesía tiene una connotación claramente peyorativa, dadas sus influencias marxistas y su matiz ideológico abiertamente de izquierda. Otros sustantivos ideológicamente cargados y que permiten apreciar la concepción de la política en Chávez son imperio, imperialismo y capitalismo, que se distribuyen en el gráfico y en la tabla de forma más o menos parecida, y contrarrevolución. Por otro lado, destaca también el uso del neologismo majunchismo, que configura la creación de una jerga propia e identitaria del chavismo, un recurso también muy común en los líderes populistas. Majunchismo fue una de las tantas formas nominales que usó Hugo Chávez para designar o para referirse a la oposición, sobre todo en la campaña electoral última de 2012. Asimismo, observamos otros sustantivos de carga no ya ideológica en sentido estricto, sino que son nombres sustantivos que en la política en general reflejan la visión negativa del adversario cuando se hace referencia a este mediante dichos términos. Me refiero a los casos de dictadura y colonia. Además, observamos que existe un sustantivo fuego que en principio es neutro, debería ser neutro, dado que carece de sentido político si lo consideramos aisladamente, pero que, como veremos enseguida, se combina con adjetivos cuyo significado conlleva una estigmatización del exogrupo. Por último, notamos que el sustantivo proyecto tiene una alta frecuencia en el corpus, algo también esperable, y va acompañado, como veremos a continuación, de complementos del nombre que muestran la posición ideológica del emisor protagonista de la enunciación. Casos similares son gobierno, candidatura y oposición. Vamos a ver ahora este gráfico bastante lleno de diferentes elementos. Observamos que es muy diferente, por supuesto, al que veíamos, el otro gráfico de red que veíamos en el caso de nosotros, y apreciamos que existe un sustantivo, capitalismo, que solo se describe en el corpus de Chávez como imperialista. Es decir, el capitalismo, en palabras de Chávez, siempre es imperialista. Siempre que él usa este término, capitalismo, siempre va acompañado del adjetivo imperialista, como pueden ver también en la tabla. El ellos, como imperialismo e imperio, reciben un tratamiento similar, pues salvo en una ocasión, el caso de imperialismo nuevo, son asociados a los Estados Unidos a través de adjetivos que así lo reflejan. Hablo de norteamericano, americano, yanqui, para el caso de imperio, y norteamericano para el caso de imperialismo. Se trata de la configuración de la identidad de un enemigo político externo, de un exogrupo que además es externo a Venezuela, digamos. A este enemigo externo lo observamos, por ejemplo, designado mediante fuego, la palabra que veíamos en el gráfico del nosotros, del que habla Chávez, que es una expresión metafórica, obviamente, que sirve para hacer referencia al accionar político y bélico del gobierno estadounidense, pues es un fuego, como pueden apreciar en el gráfico y en la tabla, que él describe como fuego imperialista, genocida, fascista y asesino. Por otro lado, ciertas formas nominales en el discurso de Chávez nos presentan a un enemigo interno, venezolano, que pese a ser interno, se presenta o nos presenta a Chávez como subordinado a este enemigo externo. Se trata de la burguesía venezolana y el gobierno de la burguesía, que se asocia, que se relaciona con el imperialismo y con el propio gobierno estadounidense. La única forma nominal de carácter neutro que encontramos aquí es oposición venezolana, aunque podemos apreciar también en la tabla y en el gráfico una tendencia en Chávez a calificar dicha oposición venezolana como contrarrevolucionaria, cargando así de ideología a dicho término. Veamos ahora, y ya con esto voy terminando, las formas nominales designativas del ellos y su contexto, en qué fragmentos discursivos se insertan y qué palabras o qué enunciados las rodean. Habla Chávez del proyecto de la burguesía, que según él no contempla el camino hacia el sur, sino que es el proyecto de la burguesía venezolana, que es el mismo del capitalismo imperialista de los Estados Unidos, que aquí en Venezuela se impuso durante casi todo el siglo XX. Vemos que aquí también hay un grupo, hay un exogrupo marcado doctrinalmente a través de la ideología imperialista. Es un exogrupo que Chávez nos presenta como agresor y que si bien, como les dije antes, si bien se identifica con Venezuela porque es burguesía venezolana, siempre se subordina a un enemigo o agresor externo que es el imperialismo capitalista estadounidense. Y en un último ejemplo tenemos algo interesante que es el lenguaje en clave religiosa de Chávez. Chávez, para nadie es un secreto, que era católico y que continuamente manifestaba su catolicismo en sus discursos. Cuando Chávez dice los candidatos del diablo, refiriéndose con este término despectivo diablo a George Bush, hijo, presidente de Estados Unidos en aquel momento, dice que ellos no saben ni hablar, que ellos, los candidatos del diablo, los imperialistas, los de la oposición, no saben ni presentar una idea, andan balbuceando, no hablan, sino que balbucean respuestas, dan vergüenza, repite vergüenza muchas veces, y habla de oposición contrarrevolucionaria, este sintagma que veíamos en el gráfico. Esto claramente constituye, este enunciado constituye la emisión desde el punto de vista pragmático, de actos de habla que podríamos calificar como inherentemente descorteses. Y recordamos también en esta ocasión que esto, la descortesía verbal abierta y deliberada hacia el oponente político, es otro de los rasgos fundamentales del populismo, junto con el antagonismo entre nosotros y ellos, y la afectividad verbal exacerbada. Bueno, paso ya a las conclusiones y con esto sí que termino. Y bueno, en primer lugar, mediante el estudio aquí presentado hemos podido dar cuenta de la manera en la que Hugo Chávez construye el endogrupo político-ideológico, observando un claro predominio del uso de elementos léxico-semánticos de alta carga doctrinal, en concreto, religiosa y, sobre todo, ideológica. Diversas formas nominales designativas del nosotros reflejan, además de esta ideologización del endogrupo en el discurso del emisor político venezolano, la búsqueda de la configuración de una identidad basada en lo autóctono, en lo propio. Aquello que Hugo Chávez relaciona con su propia figura de emisor y la de los destinatarios con los cuales se fusiona discursivamente buscando dicha identidad colectiva, es decir, prácticamente todo lo que el emisor populista vincula a ese nosotros, tiene raíces en un sentimiento patriótico, tal como él lo experimenta y lo expresa. Es un endogrupo que tiene una identidad ideológica, socialista, revolucionaria y bolivariana, pero a su vez Bolívar es rasgo identitario de toda Venezuela, país que además Chávez describe como una patria nuestra e independiente. Por otro lado, el exogrupo político-ideológico, es decir, ese ellos, rival que se presenta en el discurso populista más bien como enemigo, tiene una identidad, según Chávez, claramente ideológica también, pero asociada a lo foráneo, a lo externo. Es un ellos amenazador y agresor, es un ellos sujeto inmoral, es ante todo también un grupo ideológico muy concreto como es el imperialismo capitalista. Este se identifica mayoritariamente con aquello que es precisamente ajeno y contrario a lo autóctono, es decir, es norteamericano o es venezolano, pero siempre, cuando es venezolano, como veíamos en el análisis, siempre se presenta como subordinado al gobierno estadounidense, como queda reflejado en los datos del corpus. Y toda esta construcción identitaria de ellos configura un ente antagónico que, bajo el influjo del imperialismo norteamericano, pretende destruir aquello que el chavismo procura construir. Así que con estas conclusiones y con las referencias bibliográficas, los dejo y muchísimas gracias por su atención. Acuyé.
Sí, muchas gracias, doctor Ricardo Conet. Excelente su exposición, muy interesante el tema, verdaderamente apasionante. Dejamos entonces este espacio abierto por si haya gente que quiera preguntar algo.
Buenos días. Quiero preguntarle algo, ¿verdad? Al profesor, lo felicito por su investigación. Gracias. Y veo que también estudió en la Universidad de... Así que habla francés, supongo, ¿verdad? Sí, estudió en Bélgica. Sí. Ah, bueno, yo soy profesora de francés y estoy por la Asociación de Profesores. Quería preguntarle si en ese sentido, cuando describimos todos estos módulos, ¿verdad?, doctrinarios, ¿considera usted que Hugo Chávez en ese sentido es, digamos, más original o es simplemente una repetición otra vez de otros modelos de Cuba? Pienso en eso porque nosotros como vecinos tenemos Argentina y vemos bastante parecida la situación, ¿verdad?, doctrinaria con la mezcla del peronismo y el kirchnerismo. Pero como usted expuso así bastante con detalle, Hugo Chávez, podríamos decir, cumple entonces con una cierta madurez y también cierta originalidad con la manera en que él dispensó su doctrina. Me pregunto nada más eso.
Sí, es una excelente pregunta. Muchísimas gracias, profesora Gloria Melgarejo. Un gusto conocerla. A ver, hay que tener en cuenta una cosa muy importante, y es que tal como yo concibo el populismo, no se trata de una ideología, ¿no? Se trata más bien de una forma de hacer el discurso que está al servicio de la ideología, pero que no constituye propiamente la ideología. Entonces las formas son más o menos similares, porque son formas de hacer discurso, pero el contenido de dichas formas varía según la ideología. Si puede ser de derecha, si puede ser de izquierda, varía también según el ámbito geográfico o el contexto sociohistórico en el cual está inmerso el líder político populista, y en ese sentido pues sí que puede haber una originalidad de parte de Chávez, porque si bien ha habido muchos populistas de izquierda en Latinoamérica, también hay de derechas, por supuesto, pero en ese momento estaba en apogeo, digamos, el populismo de izquierda, que también se ve en Argentina, que también se ve, por ejemplo, se vio en Ecuador, en Bolivia, etcétera. En Brasil, bueno, en Brasil también, sí. Ahora se ha visto más el populismo de derecha en Brasil, pero en su momento también el de izquierda. Digamos que Chávez fue, claro, una innovación en el sentido de que su manera de dar los discursos, en ellos se permitía muchas improvisaciones, se permitía mezclar muchas corrientes ideológicas diferentes, como el cristianismo, por ejemplo, con el socialismo, cosa que no siempre se mezcla muy bien, o con el marxismo. Y si bien toma ideas, como usted ha muy bien apuntado, de Fidel Castro de Cuba, sí que él las mezcla de una forma muy creativa y muy particular. Y eso sí es innovador en ese sentido. Y no se ha vuelto a ver, yo hasta ahora, por supuesto, Nicolás Maduro, actual presidente de Venezuela, no tiene ni comparación a nivel discursivo con Hugo Chávez, y creo que no solamente él, sino ninguno de los populistas actualmente tienen esa capacidad oratoria, persuasiva, seductora que tenía Chávez al emitir los discursos. Espero con esto haberles respondido.
Sí, gracias, sí.
¿Alguien más quiere participar?
Otra preguntita, si no hay nadie más que pregunte.
Adelante.
Porque nuestra colega Gloria Medina es psicóloga también, y por eso le quería preguntar al profesor si hay estudios durante que usted realizó su investigación de este tipo de lenguaje, este tipo de análisis de discurso. Usted le ve que dé digamos, alguna ventaja psicológica, ¿verdad? Entre un discurso populista a lo Chávez o un discurso, por ejemplo, como el de Trump o el de Bolsonaro, para venir otra vez a Latinoamérica. Desde el punto de vista, ¿verdad?, de convencer a las masas, ¿verdad?, de adherencia, digo también, porque lo vemos, es un fenómeno popular que crece y crece, ¿verdad?, tanto a la derecha como a la izquierda. En Europa se está viendo también. Entonces, no sé si usted conoce de algún estudio así específico sobre, sin duda que todos están siguiendo, se inspiran, ¿verdad?, de la propaganda y de todo lo que venga, pero no sé si habrá, digamos, una manera que sea como más exitosa, si el modelo de Trump o Bolsonaro o el modelo de Chávez, y tal vez, bueno, Fidel Castro yo lo aparto un poco porque fue otro su mensaje, digamos. No sé si se entiende mi pregunta.
Sí, se entiende perfectamente. Bueno, no sé si la profesora Medina quiere decir algo también desde el punto de vista psicológico, o digo yo primero lo que pienso y luego usted, ¿sí? Ok. Bueno, obviamente yo no soy psicólogo, soy lingüista, pero sí que hay estudios desde muchos puntos de vista diferentes, desde muchas perspectivas, porque claro, el análisis del discurso es una empresa multi e interdisciplinar. Esto es algo que tenemos que tener en cuenta, y por eso la pregunta es muy interesante. El populismo se ha estudiado, hay estudios desde el punto de vista fisiológico, biológico incluso. No recuerdo ahora mismo una autora que publicó hace poco en la editorial Routledge un libro, pero no recuerdo ahora el nombre, sobre ese tema. Y por supuesto, desde el punto de vista psicológico también hay estudios. Ahora mismo no tengo en mente cada uno de los nombres, pero sí que existen. Y en estos estudios lo que se demuestra es que el populismo tiene éxito porque lo que hace el populismo, en contraste con otros tipos de discursos, digamos, más formales, más de retórica más clásica, es ir directamente hacia las emociones, la afectividad. Y se ha descubierto que se persuade o se seduce, más bien, a través de argumentos de tipo emotivo, emocional, afectivo, mucho más que a través de una argumentación bien elaborado, sino que se apela más a los sentimientos. Y en ese sentido, pues claro, el populista se adapta a su contexto y trata de conectar emocionalmente con el pueblo, con la ciudadanía, pero de acuerdo a pues, las características específicas de dicho país. Pero sí que es importante el tema de la afectividad, de cómo se conecta a través de la afectividad en el discurso.
Sí, gracias. Yo se lo pregunto justamente porque yo viví 22 años en Estados Unidos en la era de Trump, así que yo decía, pero ¿cómo puede ser este rechazo a la racionalidad? Decía yo, ¿verdad? Todo es tan irracional, pero bueno, éxito tuvo y bueno, menos mal que la gente de repente revierte otra vez a la racionalidad, pero perdura, ¿verdad? La lección perdura. Por eso, habiendo vivido también, por supuesto, yo en Latinoamérica, ¿verdad? Durante las dictaduras y todo lo demás, pero me llama la atención justamente poder decir en algún momento, bueno, ¿quién va a durar más? ¿Este modelo populista? ¿O en algún momento vamos a volver a lo tradicional, lo clásico, digamos, en las democracias por lo menos? Y le agradezco.
Sí, solo un comentario más al respecto, es que la politóloga Margaret Canavan explica que el populismo viene por oleadas o viene por épocas, ¿okay? Porque siempre tiene que haber un detonante, tiene que haber una crisis, tiene que haber un momento, puede ser una crisis de corrupción, una crisis del sistema bipartidista que se empieza a resquebrajar, puede también ser una crisis política, económica, pero tiene que haber un detonante, un motivo para que esto pase. Entonces, ¿cuándo va a terminar? No lo sé. Estamos en un momento ahora en el cual, con todas las redes sociales y con la digitalización del discurso, ¿no? de la racionalidad, por lo emotivo. Eso no podemos predecir el futuro, pero vamos a ver qué pasa en ese sentido.
Bueno, sí.
¿Alguien más quiere participar? Tenemos 2 minutos a nuestro favor. Bueno, parece que vamos a ir cerrando. Muchísimas gracias, doctor Ricardo Conet. Yo pronuncio siempre a la francesa. Sé que su apellido es Conet, ¿verdad? Sí, pero me sale siempre con la acentuación al final. Muchísimas gracias por su participación en nombre de la organización de este tercer Congreso Paraguayo de Lingüística Aplicada. Le agradecemos muchísimo y esperamos también su participación en la publicación del artículo, que pueda pasar esta ponencia a una forma de artículo, de manera que podamos tener también la oportunidad de leerlo en la revista que publica el Instituto Superior de Lenguas. Muchísimas gracias a todos los presentes también.
Muchísimas gracias a todos.
Muchas gracias y hasta pronto.
Hasta pronto, muchas gracias.
colleague of mine when I was doing my PhD work at Penn State. We did a lot of work together. We worked for the same professor, Dr. Janet Van Hel, who already gave a talk 2 days ago. Today, Holly is also joining us. I think we're still waiting for her. Oh no, there you go. Hi, Holly. Hi, Holly. How are you? Okay, and Holly Saharchuk is also a colleague of mine for a year or two before I graduated from Penn State, and she also works for Dr. Janet Van Hel at Penn State. Yu Shuang graduated and is currently doing her postdoc work at UConn. All right, so this panel was created to talk about the non-linguistic factors that affect language processing, which is something that unites all of our research interests. So I'm actually going to let Yu Shuang go first, and then Holly, and then me, because I think Yu Shuang is going to present work with children. So we're going to go in chronological age. All right. If you have any questions, please let us know. Okay, Yu Shuang, you can share your screen whenever you want to.
Oh, I didn't include the children part.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. But it's the right flow anyway.
Okay, where is my PowerPoint? Can you guys see? Oh, sorry. I need to allow Zoom to. Wait, well, I need to quit and reopen. Hold on, I'll be right back.
That's okay.
Okay, should work now.
Yeah, now you start sharing. Great, thank you.
Let me share. Where is slides to show? Okay, can you guys see the slides?
Yes, perfect.
So, hello everyone, my name is Yu Shuang, and today I'm going to present part of my dissertation work titled Listen to a Foreign Friends to a Noisy Restaurant, Neurocorrelates of Listening to a Foreign Accent Speech in Noise. So yeah, this is part of it, and I graduated in the summer. Alright, so in nowadays globalized world, it is very common for us to run into speakers speaking with a foreign accent, such as right now you're listening to me speaking English, but I do have a noticeable Chinese accent, so that's a foreign accent. And we also often to listen to each other when we're surrounded by background noise, such as when we were at conferences, when we were in meetings, and when we were in coffee shops. So consequently, processing foreign accent speech in noisy backgrounds has become a common characteristic of everyday communication. So in this presentation, we'll focus on one research questions. We will be looking at the neuromechanisms underlying the processing of native and foreign accent sentences in quiet or in background noise. So here is a brief introduction. Foreign accent speech can be defined as non-pathological speech that differs in some noticeable respect from the native speaking pronunciation norms. So the phonological properties of the foreign accent speech usually suffers some interference from the L1 phonetics. So for instance, sometimes the foreign accent L2 speech will contain phonological approximations of L1. So for instance, right now I'm speaking to you in English, but since my native language is Chinese, I may be borrowing some similar Chinese sound and use it in my English rather than using the authentic English accent. So that's part of where this foreign accent may arise. Okay. So Here, in this study, we will focus on higher level foreign accent word and sentence processing instead of like sound perception. And in the previous research, it was found that foreign accent speech is associated with some processing cost, in that listeners, native listeners, they will show the slower rate of processing and also lower rate of comprehension accuracy. So it is hard for them to understand foreign accent speech, and this was found across a wide range of studies, such as the sentence transcription test, truth or false judgment test, and a probe word judgment test. This is all behavioral research. And now, most real-life environments are loaded with background noise, and background noise is one type of environmental speech degradation that basically got degraded during speech transmission. So in this study, we'll combine the two together, and I will tell you a little bit more about electroencephalogram. So that's EEG. So that's what actually all three talks will be focusing on. So electroencephalogram recordings, or EEG, provide us with millisecond precision of scalp recorded electrical activity. So as you can see here, we put the cap with electrodes on the participants, and the signal get through an amplifier, and we have this EEG activity. So this is the raw data, and you can see they're kind of messy, but we can also call it brainwave. So, but that's the recording. And in this study, we'll be using the event-related potential. So that's basically you average this very raw EEG signal, you time lock them to certain events to capture neural changes during cognitive processing as it unfolds over time. So now you have a lot of this activity and you time lock them together, so you get a smoother wave, and these are the ERP waveforms. So that can tell us about the underlying processing. So it provides us with real-time temporal dynamic as listeners process accented speech, because it's really millisecond precision, and it's very safe. It's non-invasive. The only downside is maybe your hair will be a little bit messy because of the gel, but it's non-invasive. So it is widely used in babies, children, and adults, and older adults too. And in this current presentation, we'll be focusing on semantic processing. So what component we'll be using and what paradigm we'll be using to examine semantic processing. So we have this ERP paradigm called semantic violation paradigm. So basically, participants who are listening to sentences, and half of the sentences are semantically well-formed sentences, such as Nina took her coffee with cream and sugar. So sugar is congruent with the preceding context. So this is a semantically well-formed sentence. And the other half will have this anomalous target words, such as Nina took her coffee with cream and socks. So this is called a semantic violation paradigm. And the ERP component we'll be looking at is called M400. So it is a marker of lexical semantic access. So here you can look at the graph. This is an example here. Notice this plot negative up, positive down. So when you listen to a Nina take her coffee with cream and socks. So when you listen to the sentence and you time lock the response to the socks word, you can see this more negative ERP response time. It's peaked around 400 milliseconds. So this is basically telling us our brain detected semantic anomaly in the sentence that shouldn't be there. So having an M400 when you are listening to anomalous word is good. It means our brain is able to detect the semantic anomaly, so they notice something is wrong. However, if the M400 gets smaller, it means it's somewhat a little bit compromised. So that will be related to the results section we will be talking about. Okay, so we'll be using semantic violation paradigm, and we will be focusing on the M400 effect. So briefly on methods, we have 35 adults participants, and they are all monolingual American English speakers tested in US, and they're right-handed and without a history of hearing, neurological language disorders, and without prior history of extensive experience. So It will be a different story if you start to look at people with a lot of experience with foreign accent, but here we are basically looking at people who don't have experience. Right? And this is a little bit about the design. So it's a 2x2x2 within subject design. And so 2 accent types, native accent being American accent, and foreign accent, we choose to use Chinese accent. And we have 2 background types. Half of sentences that are presented in quiet, and the other half will be embedded in babble, multi-talker babble. I don't know whether you can hear it, but I'll play it. So just a little bit. So this is a talker file that I use. Wait, sorry. I don't know whether you guys hear that. Basically, it's a multi-talker babble. You kind of know people are talking in the background, but you cannot pick up lexical cues from the background. So that we was using. And then we have 2 semantic types. So that's the semantic violation. Half of the sentences are semantic well-formed, such as Kevin reached into his pocket to get the keys. And the other half were anomalous, such as Kevin reached into his funeral to get the keys. So here is a little bit the procedure. So participant will be wearing the cap, and we'll make sure we have good EEG signals. And when they're ready, they'll press a button and it will listen to 1 sentence at a time. And after they listen to each sentence, there's a 50% chance we'll ask them to repeat back the sentence. So we use this verbal repetition accuracy as a behavioral measure of how successful they are at understanding the foreign accent and the background noise. All right. Now let's go to results. So we first look at the behavioral response. So the verbal repetition. Remember, after this, they hear the sentence or repeat them back. Okay, here now let's focus on the bar graph here, as it looks more straightforward. And so the 2 kind of blue bars are the accuracy on the American native accented sentence, and the pink bars are sorry, I think I have background noise in the room. And the pink bars are the foreign accented sentence, so the Chinese accents. And so let's first look at the effect of so that will be for accent, right? So let's compare the blue bars to the pink bars. And you can notice that the blue bars on average have higher accuracy than the pink bars. So this suggests that they are more accurate at repeating native accented sentence back versus Chinese foreign accented sentence back. Okay, so that's a main effect of accent. And we also have this main effect of background noise. So now the lighter bars, okay, so the light blue and the light purple are the sentences presented in quiet, and the darker bars, so darker blue and darker purple, are sentences presented in noise. And you can see the lighter bars are also higher, so they have more accurate than the darker bars, meaning that participants are in general has an easier time repeating back sentences presented in quiet versus in background noise. What is interesting and more critical here is we have this accent background interaction effect, and I will explain to you here. So let's just focus on the left 4 bars here. As you can see, so the blue bars are native English accents, pink bars are foreign accent. As you can see, when noise is added to these 2 types of accent, the decline in a native accented sentence, in repeating a native accent is back, is much smaller than the decline. So when you add foreign accent to, when you add background noise to the foreign accent, you can see the drop is much more dramatic. So that means that the background noise, if the negative impact of background noise is augmented when it's foreign accent versus native accent. So this is very interesting, saying that basically having the 2 together even compromise our comprehension more severely. Okay, now we quickly look at the ERP results. So this is the M400 that I will be walking you through. Sorry, I should be using same colors, but I didn't. So now you can see here So the native, their response to native accent is on the left and foreign accent on the right. And let's now first only look at their response to the native accent. When they are listening to native accent and I plot positive up, negative down, this is one thing that's kind of different in the ERP literature. People have different preference. So in the future, when you're reading some ERP graphs, just first pay attention whether they plot positive up or negative up. So here, for the native accent, you can see the solid lines are the semantic well-formed sentence, and dotted lines are semantic anomalous sentence. And the orange lines are sentences presented in quiet, and purple and orange are sentences presented in noise. Let's just look at the central electrodes here. As you can see here, they have this more negative response. So this is the M400 response to semantically anomalous sentence. So that's the dotted line. So that means they're detecting a semantic anomaly. But you can notice the M400 effect. So for everyone, you compare the differences between the solid line and the dotted line in the same color. So you can see for native American accent presented in quiet. So that's the two orange lines. I lose my cursor. Two orange lines, you see this much bigger M400 than the American accented sentences presented in noise. So this saying that having noise in the background, it compromises our brain a little bit to detect the semantic anomaly, but it's still there, so they can still do it. Okay, so that's the case for native accents, native accented sentence. What about the foreign Chinese accent? We can also again look at here. So this blue color is foreign accent sentences present in quiet, and the red one are foreign accent sentences present in noise. And you can see here we still have this negativity between the blue lines. So even for foreign accent speech presented in quiet, they can still detect the semantically anomaly, albeit it's smaller than the native accent, but they can still do it. However, when you look at the Chinese accent sentence presented in noise, you can see we don't see this negativity anymore. Our brain basically struggled and failed to detect the semantic anomaly because of both the foreign accent and the background noise. All right, so this is kind of echoing the behavioral results that we presented previously. Now, I think I'm out of time. I'll just recap quickly. So on the behavioral level, we found that both foreign accent and background noise negatively impact speech comprehension. And such negative impact is further augmented when listeners were challenging with both. So you can see when they're listening to negative accent speech in quiet, so that's the ideal listening condition, they're at ceiling. However, when you combine foreign accent with background noise, they drop to this rate at chance in terms of their comprehension. And in terms of ERP results, both foreign accent and background noise give us a smaller semantic M400. That's an index of impaired lexical semantic access during an activation during online processing. So this is kind of talking a little bit to this model here. We don't have much time to talk about it, but basically, when it's arguing that when you have good match, so basically if you are listening to native speech in quiet, you have this perfect match between the auditory and the phonological representation you already have in your brain. So it's very easy for you to understand in this case. However, when you are mixed, we start to have foreign accent or background noise, this acoustic match becomes poor, and that's why we sometimes will need to recruit this mentor resources that will help you comprehend. But basically, when the match becomes too poor, it will end up with not enough mental resources to process the sentence, and that leads to declined comprehension accuracy. So the take-home messages here is that a familiar foreign accent and or background noise indeed impair the lexical semantic access during online processing, and thus leading to decreased behavioral comprehension accuracy. Right, I think that's all. Thank you for your time, and thank you for having me here. And do you guys have any question? I should stop sharing. Okay.
Thank you, Yushuang. Thank you so much for giving this talk. And as you saw, Yu Shuang is still a highly successful researcher. She was largely funded through NSF and different awards. And I'm sure she'll continue to do so now that she's at UConn. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hand or type in the chat box. And just so you know, Yu Shuang too, this panel is being live streamed on Facebook, Facebook and YouTube as well. Okay. All right. So if no one has any other questions, let's move on to Holly. Then we're gonna switch gears a little bit. Yu Shuang introduced. This is why I really wanted you to go first, Yu Shuang, because you always do a really nice job explaining like the ERP components, and I always just rush through. I always just say N400, P600, and with no context whatsoever. So great job. All right, let's move on to Holly, who's gonna do something similar but from a different point of view. So you can go ahead and share your screen, and then you're muted, just so you know.
Okay, are we seeing my slides and everything?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks.
Oh my God, Holly, you translated stuff.
Yeah, I did my best.
She's a very good speaker of Spanish, and so is her husband, who lives in Chile. So great.
Yes, I did my best to put some Spanish sort of subtitles throughout. So forgive me for my L2 translations if they're not very good. But today we're going to be talking about whether our brains are more prescriptive than our mouths. So looking at whether experience with dialectal variation and how that differentially impacts your brain activity and also your behavior. So here we have a nice map of the U.S. and there are many, many dialect regions, but today we're going to be looking at the southern U.S. dialect region, which is characterized by a whole host of phonetic and lexical and syntactic variations from what we might call unmarked or sort of mainstream varieties of English. And I'm going to use the acronym SUSE throughout to refer to this sort of overall dialect region. So SUSE standing for Southern U.S. English. So yes, if I use the acronym, you know what I mean. So one set of syntactic variations in Southern U.S. English has to do with modal verbs. And so, for example, in all English dialects, we can express, I just used one, we express possibility with the modal verb can or could is another form of this verb can. So we can say something like, you could go to the store. And so both mainstream and SUSE dialects use this kind of construction very frequently. Both of these dialects have this sort of available in their repertoire. Another very common modal verb is should, which expresses obligation. So you should go to the store. So something about like it's an obligation for you to go to the store for some reason, right? And so we're going to be focusing on these two modal verbs today and comparing them to, in SUSE dialects, there's another option available for expressing these ideas of possibility and obligation. But this kind of construction in SUSE dialects is actually ungrammatical in mainstream English dialects. And so this is where we can kind of tease apart experience with a particular variety. So there's a lot of sub-regional variation within SUSE, but one of the most common of these modal constructions available for Southern U.S. English speakers is might could. So you could say something like, you might could go to the store. And as you can see in my sort of little Spanish translation there, like it doesn't make any sense. You can make sense of it, but it's not grammatically well formed. And the same thing with this example, might should. So you might should go to the store. So it has some of those possibility or obligation meanings, but it has this extra sort of nuance to it. And a SUSE speaker would use this kind of construction to signal indirectness, maybe hedge around a request, or just generally be polite in one-on-one conversation. So again, this is not it is familiar to Sioux's speakers, and it's available in their repertoire, but definitely the bare sort of could and should, what I'm calling single modals, those are most common. But then we also have this other available construction, which is called a double modal. So we can distinguish these double modals from single modals. So that's sort of the main comparison that we'll be setting up here throughout the experimental design. So here we are looking at our participant groups. And so we tested 2 different groups of participants. 22 of them, after rejecting people for different reasons, were non-Southern. And so being at Penn State, most of these participants were from sort of born and raised in the Pennsylvania area, as you can see from these sort of purpley circles here. Some Southerners were sort of born outside the Southern region, as you can see, but I restricted my Southern participants to having been sort of raised, so from ages 3 to 18 or so, in the Southern U.S. Region, as you can see from these more green teal diamonds here. And so we have these 2 different participant groups with these 2 different dialect experiences. And then in terms of the actual EEG task that we had them doing, so they come in, Yushuang just had an awesome explanation of EEG and how to get from EEG to ERP, which I'm very grateful for, because like Carla, I just skipped over all that and I was like, we're just not going to talk about that. But so in terms of what the participant was doing when they sat down in our EEG booth, is they would see a ready screen, because this was sort of a self-paced listening kind of task. So they'd see a ready screen, they'd press a button, say, yes, I'm ready, and then they would listen to our context sentence. And so in this example, Caitlin is having a hard time with her essay. This is sort of setting up our pragmatic context for potentially having one of these double modal constructions. Then afterwards, I'd see a ready screen again, because we don't want them to blink during the sentence that we really care about. And then they would listen to our main sentence. So she thinks she should ask the professor for an extension. And so when we are doing our ERP analyses, we're focusing on the processing of the modal, specifically should in this case. And in this way, we can compare processing of sentences with the Sioux's construction to sentences without the Sioux's construction, but just have sort of the bare should, like she thinks she should ask the professor for an extension. So we can compare the same exact word, but in these 2 different sort of dialect contexts. And this is just a very high overview of the really awesome information Yushuang just gave. But so essentially, right, the participants sitting in the booth, they have this continuous measure of EEG being recorded from the scalp. And then later on, we can sort of slice up that continuous measure into the specific neural activity that is associated with a critical word that we care about. So in our case, we're looking at should or could throughout this experiment. And so we extract all those little time windows associated with neural activity associated with the word that we care about, and then we average across those. And so then we can sort of look at the overall pattern of neural activity for a might-should kind of construction versus a should kind of construction. And so that's what we're going to look at, just to give you a little taste. And so here I'm showing our Southern participant group. And as Nancy, Sean, and Carla know, we love to plot ERPs in this sort of format. So you can imagine you're looking down on somebody's head. And this is what you would see. And so the blue line is our sort of baseline should single modal, everybody uses it kind of construction. And the green line is going to be our might, could, or might, should sort of construction. And I'm only showing you the Southern group because the non-Southern participants look pretty much exactly the same, which is one of our sort of main takeaways from the ERP results. And we can zoom in on just one particular electrode to kind of focus your attention here. And so we can see here negative voltages are plotted upwards. So we can see that the green line is much more positive going down versus the blue line. And so that is telling us that Southern listeners who are very familiar with this construction are having the same level of difficulty sort of integrating the should of the might should into their sentential structure. They're having the same difficulty as non-Southern participants who don't have any familiarity with this construction. So in this case, experience is not really driving our processing of these constructions. Our sort of main takeaway from these results is that something about standardness or your knowledge of what is grammatical in the mainstream dialect is actually what's driving your processing, even if you are familiar with this kind of construction. So here in the ERPs, we're not seeing any difference between non-Southern and Southern participants. But when we look at their behavioral data, so afterwards they listened to a similar set of sentences again, and they gave ratings of how acceptable the sentences were and how easy it was for them to understand, so this intelligibility measure. And what we're going to want to focus on is for our non-Southern listeners, so this unmarked group, their acceptability of a might could or a might should is way low. It's way below the mean rating that they could give. So they're saying that these constructions are super not acceptable. Whereas our Southern participants are well above the mean for the scale, saying, yeah, these are acceptable. I accept these. And we're pretty much seeing the same thing for intelligibility, right? So our Southern participants are saying, yeah, these double modals are super easy to understand. And our non-Southern participants are saying, well, I can kind of understand it, but it's not great, right? So, and this is just sort of a subtracted version of the same data. So what we're seeing here is that actually in their behavioral responses offline, experience really is driving how they're viewing these sentences, right? And so just to give you sort of a high level look at the results, what we're seeing is that in the non-Southern group, it's difficult to process and unacceptable, unintelligible. Whereas in our Southern group, they're displaying the same ERPs as the non-Southern group, but they're showing behavior in line with what we would expect with their language experience. And so overall, what we're seeing is that experience it has a differential impact on brain and behavior, right? So experience is not really driving the brain results, but is driving the behavioral. So we're seeing this split here. And we're hoping to look more into this in the future, potentially with participants who are currently going to school or living in the South, right? Because these were students at Penn State in a more mainstream language context. So it's unclear how much of this dissociation between brain and behavior is driven by, they're coming into the basement of the psychology building in Pennsylvania, and they're not expecting to hear this kind of construction, right, from their sort of home dialect. So that's all I had there. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Holly. It's so refreshing to me to hear about research that I already knew you guys did, and how even though, I've left a couple of years ago already, we're still connected through our lines of research. So it's kind of nice. Okay. So lastly, if no one has any questions, it's my turn. Yu Shuang and Holly both did a wonderful job, and they presented variations in the sound you hear, okay? So I've always had an interest in how we see also affects what we hear. So in my dissertation work, I focused on the question of whether faces can trick our ears. And I focused on the role of speaker identity on the processing of both native and foreign accented speech. And this is all the work I did while at Penn State. As you can see, the three of us with Jeanette, we share a common interest in spoken language comprehension. how do we achieve successful comprehension of a speaker's message? How do speaker identity cues affect language processing and comprehension? And my specific focus is how we integrate visual and linguistic cues and how that may affect language processing as well. Okay? As Yushuang was saying, in everyday conversations and in today's world, it's increasingly common to encounter accented speakers, foreign accented speakers, or speakers with who speak a different dialect, like Holly just presented. But there are other factors as well that affect both language comprehension and language processing. Race or ethnicity of our interlocutor is one of them. Accent, there's also age, socioeconomic status, gender, the type of these fluencies they have, and so forth. They all can and have been demonstrated to affect spoken language comprehension. But I focused on the first two ones, race and accent. Okay? Just to give you a little bit of context, in one of my favorite studies conducted in 1992, so I can't believe that was like 30 years ago now, undergraduate students in Georgia and the United States were presented with short lectures American accented English, and it was paired with either a picture of a white female or an Asian female. And eventually the participants were asked to do two things. They were asked to rate the accentedness of the instructor, and they also took like a small test on what they heard. They were scientific lectures. Okay? And what happened? Well, when the recording was paired with an Asian face, most participants reported hearing an accent that was not there. Okay, it was the same exact person speaking. The only thing different was the picture. So this effect has been termed the reverse linguistic stereotyping effect. So we basically prime our ears to what we think we're going to hear based on how someone looks. Okay, and these type of findings have been replicated in more diverse cities such as Vancouver, and they also rated the speakers as being more accented when paired with an Asian face than with a white face or Caucasian face. Okay. As Yushuang also explained, listening to accented speech can be challenging. People don't transcribe sentences as well as when there's native accent, but we also see that people can adapt quickly to foreign accented speech. Okay. However, most of these studies employed offline, so behavioral measures of language processing. And this is where Yushuang, Polly, and I come in because we're interested in online language processing. So what happens in the moment. So that's why we use EEG, okay? And there's tons of neurocognitive studies that have used ERP, so event-related potentials that Yushuang nicely explained. So I don't have to. And these studies focus on the N for 100, which is a negative ongoing wave that peaks around 400 milliseconds after the stimulus of interest. And it reflects semantic processing or integration of a word into its preceding context. The P600, which is more related to syntax. And as you can see here, the N, it's a negative ongoing wave. The P is a positive ongoing wave that peaks around 600 to 900 milliseconds after the stimulus of interest. And then there's the NREF, and that one doesn't have a time that's specified to it, but it's a negative anterior ongoing wave too that is associated with working memory demands of encountering a pronoun and like going back into short-term memory and finding its antecedent. Okay, so like Yushuang and especially Holly said that it's kind of weird for people to go into an EEG study and they get in, they have their headphones on, and then they're in a basement listening to language. And we know that language does not happen in a vacuum. This is not how we do it in real life. So my interest was to combine facial cues with the sentences themselves to kind of have, it's still not natural because it's a static image, but it's a little step closer, okay? And I had two questions. What role do visual cues play in the formation of expectations regarding a particular speaker, and how that affects processing of both foreign and non-accented speech, and how listener experience with speaker identity markers affect sentence processing. Okay, so for my dissertation, I did 3 experiments, and I'm going to talk about only the first 2 today. Okay, it was an EEG experiment, and participants were exposed to sentences that were produced by American accented speakers and Chinese accented speakers, and the sentences were paired with either white face or Asian face. Okay, and I had 3 different group of listeners: English monolinguals who had very little experience with foreign accented speech and with foreign language in general; native speakers of English of minority descent, specifically Chinese Americans. Why? Because they themselves have Asian features, but they do not have an accent. Okay, and finally, a third group was the Chinese English bilinguals, and they have a lot of experience with foreign accented speech because most of them are foreign accented speakers themselves, but they may not have so much experience with facial in linguistic incongruent cues. Okay, and as you saw, we love playing with sentences, and we make participants listen to these sentences, and in my experiment, each group listened to 480 sentences, so it's a lot. They were there for a fairly long time, and the sentences contained either a pronoun error, which is very common in Chinese accented speech, or a semantic error, and we also had control sentences. So, for example, a semantic correct sentence would be, John wrote a scientific article about pollution last year. A semantic incorrect sentence would be, John wrote a scientific coconut about pollution last year. So coconut does not fit that sentence. And in terms of pronoun, we have Mary wanted to skip dance class because she had a severe headache. That would be a correct sentence. And the incorrect version would be, Mary wanted to skip dance class because he had a severe headache. Okay? I had 4 different experimental conditions, and I here in the first experimental condition, it's congruent, so I paired a white face with the American accent. The second is an incongruent condition in which I paired an Asian face with American accent. And then the third condition is congruent again, Asian face with Chinese accent. And the fourth is probably the weirdest one, the white face with a Chinese accent. Okay. Experiment 1. I ended up using the data of 30 monolingual native speakers from Penn State. I tested 30, but then I had to exclude 5 due to excessive noise. So I ended up with 25 native English speakers, and they had little to no experience with accented speech, and they also did not speak any foreign languages. Okay. In terms of behavior, when I asked at the end of the experiment, okay, where was the speaker from? I showed the picture of the speaker and where do you think this person was from? Luckily, this is a sanity check for the condition in which I paired the white face and the American accent. Everyone was able to recognize that it was someone from the USA or America. Okay. On the other hand, when there was an Asian face, okay, with an American accent, okay, so the accent is American, but the only thing changing is the face. Only about half of the participants reported that person being from the US, okay? Other people said different parts of Asia, and 4% were not sure what they heard. For the Chinese accent, when paired with an Asian face, okay, most people were able to recognize that that was someone from China or somewhere in Asia. However, when weirdness happened, so when I had the white face with the Chinese accent, people had no clue what was happening, basically. Some people said that the speaker was from Russia, South America, Spain, China, or not sure. There's even Argentina. But no one said Paraguay. When we measured the sentence comprehension, because during that experiment, so that people don't fall asleep, and we also know that they're paying attention, we asked comprehension questions. And the average comprehension score was fairly high across all conditions. But we found a significant difference between the Chinese accent when it was paired with an Asian face versus when it was paired with a white face, and comprehension scores were slightly lower, significantly lower than. Okay, so the face does something, and it can help us right here in comprehending what we're hearing, or it can hinder us from really comprehending what we're trying to understand. When it comes to accent strength, so 1 is not very strong accent at all, 7 is a very strong accent. Here, as we expected in the monolinguals, when they presented with Chinese accent, they rated equally, statistically equally high on strength. But there's a significant variation here, or difference in the American accent when it's paired with a white face versus an Asian face. So here, even though the accent remains the same, the Asian face makes participants think that the accent might be stronger. Okay. We also asked, how difficult was it for you to understand subjective perception of what was happening? And here we found a significant difference again in the American accent. Here we see that the Asian face with the American accent was significantly harder to understand, subjectively speaking, because when we actually measure the comprehension, it was not harder when the Asian face was paired with the American accent. Okay, moving on to EEGs. I'm the worst plotter of the 3, so I make the most horrible. I have no patience for making beautiful graphs like Yushang and Holly, especially Holly, who's basically an art queen, does. I plot negative up still. I think Yushang is the most advanced of all of us in that sense, because I think most people are moving on to plotting things as they should be with positive up and negative down, but I still do negative up and positive down. Okay. So what we find here in the American accent is, again, that N400, when we're talking about semantics, right? And we can see that anteriorly here, when we have the congruent conditions, it's slightly less pronounced than incongruent conditions, okay? When we have the Chinese accent, again, we have an N400 again, but the congruent condition is produces a larger N400 than the incongruent condition. Okay, when it comes to accent, when it comes to syntax, the pronoun errors, again, we find an NREF. Okay, so people are trying to find the error and they try to find its antecedent. Here we see an NREF at the beginning, right? And then we also find significant differences towards the 600 and 1,000 milliseconds after the onset of the error. Okay, for Chinese accent, in the incongruent condition, so when there is a white face, we do see a larger NREF than in the other congruent condition, but nothing else towards the later part of the sentence. Okay. And here's a short summary of the behavioral results. And overall, we just suggest that white monolingual listeners with very little experience with Chinese accented speech and foreign languages in general rated American accented speech paired with Asian faces as more accented and harder to understand than when paired with a white face. Okay, and that replicates previous studies. And it's interesting because in comprehension, we don't find differences. So they think it's harder to understand, but they're actually comprehending pretty well. When it comes to the Chinese accent, we see that the face has consequences downstream for online processing of speech. Okay, we see that our monolinguals have certain higher sensitivity to both semantic and syntactic violations in Chinese accented speech when the pairings are congruent. Okay, so all of this just to say that there's top-down effects driven by face cued expectations regarding how a particular speaker should sound based on our experience. Okay, So this is where, this is just a summary of what I just said again, so I can skip that. The other experiment comes in, okay? So previous participants had no experience with incongruencies. Basically, they expect a white face to sound American or have an American accent, and they expect an Asian face to have a Chinese accent. The second group were the Chinese American listeners, and here they are English dominant. They often speak only English actually, and have no perceivable accent in English whatsoever. Their native speaker is English, okay? But they have the Asian features, and they have more experience with that because there's a whole YouTube video too that I always show, but I didn't this time, where people with of Asian descent are always asked, oh, where are you really from? And they're from the US, okay? Okay. So we wanted to see what would happen with the congruency and incongruency effects. Okay, so I tested 28 Chinese Americans from the Penn State community, and unfortunately 2 had to be excluded for excessive noise, and 2 of them fell asleep. Okay, so that happens more often than we want. So I ended up with 24 Chinese American listeners data. Okay, so here again, luckily for the white face, American accent, this is our sanity check. They all reported the speaker being from the USA or America, as they like to call it. For the Asian face, American accent condition, they did much better than the monolinguals in reporting that that person was from the USA or America rather than Asia or China. Okay, so they're less reliant on the face cue. Again, with Asian face, Chinese accent, most of them said that it was someone from China. And when the weird condition of white face with Chinese accent happened, again, here, remember, for the monolinguals, they were very confused as to what was happening. Most of them said someone from Russia or someone from Argentina or someone from Spain and so forth. Here, our Chinese Americans can largely identify that this person is from China. Okay, so they rely much more on the acoustic cues than on the facial cues. When it comes to our comprehension scores, they again were all very high, and there were no significant difference across conditions. Okay, so regardless of accents and face pairings, they did very well. Okay, when it came to accent strength, we did not find a significant difference as we did in the monolingual group here. But again, of course, the accent strength of the Chinese speakers were higher. Okay, but there were no differences based on the pairing of the face. Again, ease of understanding, no significant differences as well. Okay, when it comes to our ERP results, when for semantics in American accent, in the congruent condition and in the incongruent condition, we find similar N400 effects. Okay. For the Chinese accented condition, we also find N400 effects, but there's an extended negativity that is happening like 600 to 1,000 milliseconds after our stimulus of interest. So it's a longer lasting N400. And this is common for accented speech. For syntax, we find in the congruent condition a larger NREF than in the incongruent condition. And that, again, it's extended throughout until the 1,000 millisecond mark. Okay. For the Chinese accent, we have a smaller NREF. Okay, but there is an NREF of similar size in congruent and incongruent condition. Okay. So again, just a very short summary. Chinese listeners are not as sensitive as our monolingual speakers by the manipulation of the pairing of face and accent. Okay, so this leads us to say that experience with incongruencies between facial and language cues makes them less prone to using face as a predictor of how a speech signal should sound. Okay, and the same is to be said with our ERP results. So just a takeaway message again is that Chinese Americans are highly experienced with face accent incongruency. So they don't rely on those faces as much as the monolingual listeners. Okay. And something very important that I should emphasize is that these Chinese Americans do not engage in reverse linguistic stereotyping. Okay, so it's not, they don't use these facial cues to form expectations, or their expectations might not be as strong. Okay, same for our ERP results. And for future directions, I think eventually my dream would be to do this with actual videos. Now we can use deep fakes. Before, when we were young, graduate student, deep fakes were just beginning. So it was very hard to make videos even, and to make videos work with a program that we had for using recordings of EEG. So ideally, we could have audio-visual stimuli, which would make more realistic, more naturalistic paradigms. Okay. And we could also see whether there's effects, like, for example, are children sensitive to it? Is this something that we grow to learn to associate faces or races with a particular sound, or and so forth? And then compare it to our young adults, and then also older speakers. Okay, so I think I'm gonna finish here. And of course, I have to thank, I think, Yushuang. I didn't put Holly's name. I should have added Holly's name. But yes, this was my dissertation work, and I started when I was pregnant, and I finished when Oliver, my little son, was born. Okay, so this was a very long process. Okay, so I think I'm gonna leave it at that. If you guys have any questions, we'll be more than happy to answer them. If not, I understand that we used a lot of time. So you can write your questions, you can email me questions, and I can email Yushuang and Holly as well. Okay. Let's see, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. There we go. All right, so any questions whatsoever? And if not, I'm gonna let you guys go, because in Paraguay, it is lunchtime. So I'm sure everyone is hungry. Thank you so much, Holly. Oh, Valentina?
Yes, I would like to especially thank all of you for participating in our conference. I would like to especially thank Carla for organizing this panel. These are very interesting studies that makes us think about how we think about language, how we process language, the things that come into play when we are processing language, and when we're producing language. So it is for us as language researchers and language teachers, many times it is important for us to have more of this information. So I would like to invite you to send your articles to our journal to be published. And then propose, maybe Carla might be interested in organizing a special issue of our journal, and maybe get more of your colleagues to contribute, or individually. So however you, we have an open call now for the next issue, that we're hoping to get as many of the conference participants to submit their papers. And so we ask you if you would send your papers. We would be very, very grateful. And well, once again, thank you very much for connecting from all the different places where you're from. We are really appreciative of that.
Thank you, Valentina. Thank you, Yushuang. Thank you, Holly.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.